Chapter 1291. Li Huaqing didn't understand but felt it was awesome. The end had begun, the apocalypse was coming. Apocalypse? His voice was filled with absurdity. You mean the apocalypse? At this moment he didn't feel like the other party was a swindler. He just instinctively didn't believe it. It's the apocalypse of humanity. Don't think too highly of yourself. Even if humanity dies, the world is still the world. It's just that there will be fewer toys, but there will be new toys to replace them. You, me, and everyone else can survive. What does that have to do with the world? There won't be an apocalypse in the world, only humanity will. The corner of War God's mouth curled up. His smile was filled with mockery and coldness. Li Huaqing looked at his figure silently. The endless blood mist seemed to be his eternal background, constantly drifting around him. Through the blood mist, he seemed to see an incomparably great background. He narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, "Aren't you going to introduce yourself?" He used honorifics. War God Realm War God. The black dragon robe swayed lightly. Countless patterns changed crazily, finally turning into a flying dragon bearing its fangs and claws. Li Huaqing's spirit swept past the figure in front of him. His spirit power felt every detail. He could clearly feel that the dragon on the dragon robe was starting to crack. War God glanced at him and said quietly, "A very long time ago, even if this is a very long time ago, there was a very powerful creature in the Order camp. They were originally a part of the world and liked to live in groups. However, every single one of them, when they grew up, they would reach the pinnacle of strength. Some of them were very big and could even penetrate through the galaxy. Their bodies could change between real and illusory. When they were real, their bodies were almost indestructible. Each scale had the energy to crush stars. When they were illusory, they would turn into dark energy and dark matter, almost undetectable. They occupied the starry sky and viewed planets as dust. A lot of dust was on their bodies. Therefore, each and every one of them could be considered a small world. Countless planets, stars, and even galaxies were born and destroyed on their bodies. Li Huaqing's face was a little pale. They didn't need to do anything, nor did they need to maintain anything, because their existence itself was the order of the world. Do you know what pure order looks like? War God suddenly asked. Without waiting for Li Huaqing's reply, he continued, "Deathly stillness, dullness, everything is doomed, everything is unchanging, a pool of stagnant water." Later on, this creature discovered that some of the dust in its body produced a large amount of energy, and some gave birth to life. The War God went silent for a bit, then slowly spoke. For the world, living beings that naturally yearn for freedom is an accident in itself. From the world's point of view, these incomparably huge creatures have been contaminated by this life form. They've had enough of boredom and don't know the meaning of their existence. The more lives there are in the starry sky, the more excited their hearts are. Thus, they gradually began to form their own image. Horns like a deer, head like a camel, eyes like a rabbit, neck like a snake, belly like a crab, scales like a fish, claws like an eagle, palms like a tiger, ears like a cow. Thus the individual thought was born. They often turn their consciousness into infinitely smaller versions of themselves. Then, entering the dust on their body, these creatures began their first interaction with real life. That period of time was very interesting. Countless concepts of life began to constantly impact the thoughts of these creatures. Compared to their hundreds of millions of years of dullness, it was clear that living beings with the aura of freedom were the most attractive to them, but also the most rebellious. They gradually became attracted by the various characteristics of life. Of course, it could also be said to be tempting. They are the same as living beings, they can accept order, but they can't accept absolute order. They can accept chaos, but they can't accept chaos without order. After coming into contact with living beings, they gradually developed their own preferences and even formed their own order. From this perspective, as a part of the world's order, they betrayed the world. Silence. A long silence. Li Huaqing listened with great interest as if he was listening to a heavenly book. Seeing that the War God suddenly became silent, he was startled. And then, I don't know. The War God went silent for a bit, During that period of time, everything was blank. The ending shouldn't be hard to imagine. The apocalypse descended, all life was wiped out, everything was in chaos. Li Huaqing's heart suddenly turned cold. The war god's voice was very calm, but as he spoke, Li Huaqing's heart was inexplicably enveloped by an abrupt sense of fear. Extinction of life. He muttered to himself. If there is extinction, there will be new life. Any civilization will go extinct, but life will never disappear. The war god said calmly, after the first extinction of life, the powerful creatures that betrayed the world returned to the world's order. The new life began to evolve from single cells. This time, the new life had more types, the evolution was wilder, and they worshipped freedom. This kind of freedom once again attracted the powerful creatures that had returned to the direct order, and the second betrayal appeared naturally. So the apocalypse descended again? Li Huaqing asked. Perhaps anyone who heard this story would think that the war god was talking nonsense. But Li Huaqing didn't. In his heart, he didn't have the concept of believing or not, he just seriously accepted this story. This time it was war. The war god laughed. The war between humans and the world. Li Huaqing didn't say anything. His eyes became extremely focused. Of course, what you said is also correct. The apocalypse did indeed descend, and the world once again wiped out all the living creatures at that time. But perhaps due to the war being too intense, or perhaps due to other reasons, this extinction was an accident. First of all, there were 2 living creatures that didn't die during the extinction and luckily survived. Secondly, the powerful creature that betrayed the world for the second time also survived. The war god became silent again. Another blank? Li Huaqing couldn't help but ask. The war god seemed to have smiled. In a trance, the great figure formed from countless blood mist seemed to have completely overlapped with him. That should be the first war against the world. I mean, it was the first time in my memory. There might have been many times before, but I don't know much about them. The first war against the world came to an end. There were very few living creatures left. With the help of that powerful creature, the last few living creatures made different choices. One chose to live as long as heaven and earth, using his own death to suspend the world's will. The other went to the end of the world and restarted the cycle of reincarnation. One used his own body as a tool to obliterate his own soul and gave his skin to his best friend. His friend used his skin to disguise himself. His friend used his skin to take the most powerful weapon against the world, luck. And the powerful creature that betrayed the world for the second time, when it was on the verge of extinction, entered his skin that contained luck and survived with great difficulty. The skin he left behind fused with luck and that powerful creature, forming the first divine artifact after the first war against the world. It was called the Infinite Worlds. He became the foundation. The last 2 have become our hope. After the cycle of reincarnation was restarted, they survived and relied on the existence of the infinite worlds to get through the most difficult period. They gave their kind of life a definition, or rather, a name. They felt that their kind of life should be called. The war god suddenly looked at Li Huaqing. Do you know what that name is? Li Huaqing shook his head blankly. Human. The war god gave his answer. They felt that their kind of life should be called human. That is the origin of the ancient human race. Meanwhile, the powerful creatures that fought alongside them completely broke away from the order of the world and began to live on the destiny of the human race. Thus, they became the first totems of the ancient human race. The first humans called them the dragon race. Humans and dragon race. Life and world. Li Huaqing, who had been listening with great interest, smiled. A new version of the myth? That's interesting. Then let's talk about something more interesting. The war god also smiled. The first 2 humans created the human race. Who are they? Li Huaqing's smile was obvious as he interrupted the war god. She. The war god was silent for a while and said, combining the known myths, Li Huaqing quickly locked onto a target. Fuxi. It's she. The war god said lightly, this name is a single word. She and his sister Shibai. They were the first 2 ancient humans. It was also them who defined their life form as human. Later on, People used to call them Emperor Shi and Empress Shi. Li Huaqing shook his head seriously. Later on, people used to call them Fuxi and Yua. The war god had a feeling that this little brother was talking nonsense with him, so he simply ignored him and continued. In the eyes of the world, she is a warrior and Shi Bai is a thief. The former cut off a part of the world's ability to control the rules of the world. The latter, in a sense, stole a part of the world's imagination. Hence, they created the current human race. It is creation, a method that combines reproduction and imagination. Fighting against the world is the mission of the human race from then until now. Later on, Shi and Shi Bai still fell. However, before they fell, they created a force that could barely fight against the world. This power had an order similar to the rules of the world, but it was not an absolute order. It had a chaos similar to the rules of the world, but it was not an absolute chaos either. This power had found a balance between absolute order and chaos, so this power was called the neutral power by later generations. In fact, there are 3 paths. When you reach the peak of each path, you can barely fight against the evil of the world. This is what they left, and it has been passed down to this day. It is also the most precious treasure. With this force, more and more young talents appeared in the human race, such as Great Emperor Xianyuan, Emperor Yan, Xingtian. Li Huaqing nodded cooperatively. The war god glanced at him and continued expressionlessly. When the later generations reach the true peak along these 3 paths, they will be qualified to represent the human race and bear the heavy responsibility of protecting the human race against the world. They are called human emperors. In the heyday of the human race, there were 5 human emperors, including Huang Shi. Do you know who the last human emperor was? The war god looked at Li Huaqing and asked, "You can combine it with the history you know." Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes. The title of human emperor was very old for Zhongzhou state. People were familiar with the title of emperor, or in other words, emperor. Who was the first emperor in the history of Zhongzhou state? The answer couldn't be more obvious. Emperor Zhou, who was known as a peerless emperor and had hundreds of sons. According to this logic, the last human emperor was King Zhou of Shang, who was famous in history for spending too much money but only had 2 sons. Shang dynasty and Zhou dynasty? Li Huaqing asked. The investiture of the gods that you know might not be fake. Of course, the 3 religions are more of a story. In fact, it was a war between the human race and the world order. It can also be regarded as a civil strife within the human race. We don't need to argue about the cause of that incident. But in that incident, too many experts of the human race were forcibly conferred as gods and returned to the order. The human race suffered heavy losses and its luck collapsed. The will of heaven and earth began to gradually gain the upper hand. It was from then on that there were no more human emperors in history, only emperors. But this is the place where the ancient human race rose. As long as there are people, the luck of the human race won't disappear completely. For thousands of years, the luck of the human race was entangled with the will of heaven and earth. Therefore, in the history of the dynasties during this period, the human race didn't really prosper for a long time. Shi and Shi Bai also died in that investiture of the gods. During this period, the will of heaven and earth and the luck of the human race kept entangling until the founding of Zhongzhou state. Until people began to return one after another, the will of heaven and earth that shrouded history was suppressed, and the luck of the human race also began to return. What do you mean by return? Li Huaqing suddenly asked. War God glanced at him and said calmly, "Break the reincarnation and return to the starry sky." This sentence was extremely simple. But Li Huaqing's blood was boiling for no reason. 2 people returned this time, and they both left legends that lasted to this day in Zhongzhou state. One was called the Heavenly Sun, and the family he left behind is still strong. The other was called War God, and the family he left behind is also continuous. I know. Li Huaqing nodded. The ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai. The ancestor of the Lin clan in seclusion. War God laughed at himself and said, "Their return completely suppressed the will of heaven and earth here." But that heavenly son was not very lucky. Or rather, he was not as lucky as the ancestor of the Lin clan, because after he returned, he found himself. Found himself? Li Huaqing was a little confused. At this moment, he saw War God's eyes clearly. There was a meaningful smile in War God's eyes, and he said softly, he found the human skin that he left behind, which belonged to him. A feeling of numbness on his scalp instantly rushed into Li Huaqing's mind. His gaze subconsciously fell on the black robe of the god of war. The black dragon robe was awe-inspiring and majestic. On the dragon robe, countless dragons wandered slowly as if they were alive, piecing together into one pattern after another. Dragon, clan, all worlds. He found the human skin that belonged to him that he left behind. Li Huaqing held his breath subconsciously. The voice of War God continued, only when he found the skin could he be considered to be completely integrated with himself in mythology and history, and he could stand at the peak of a certain field. And standing at this peak, what do you think he would think? The current peak he is at, the path he is walking on, was founded by that best friend of his. 3 paths, 3 beginnings, all of this is just the beginning. So after he completely found himself, he wore the human skin left by his former self and returned to the place where he first returned as a consciousness formed by a wisp of memory, intending to find the 4th path for the human clan. By the way, he also came to see his former best friend, who is still returning. Then, War God laughed, then he saw the president of Zhongzhou state of this generation, and accidentally found that he had awakened the power of order. He felt it necessary to say hello to the president, so he came and told him a story. Li Huaqing's hair all stood on end. He stared at War God in front of him, opened his eyes to the widest, and said word by word, "You are Lin Xianyuan?" War God's realm, War God Lin Xianyuan. War God nodded. Thunder roared. Li Huaqing stood up abruptly and sat back on the chair weakly. War God's realm, Lin Clan. War God's realm, Li Huaqing kept muttering to himself and finally smiled bitterly. If what you said is true, then your War God's realm is definitely not on Earth, right? In the starry sky. War God nodded. You are the president of Zhongzhou state. You can't be unfamiliar with extraterrestrial civilization. Isn't that what Bureau 719 of Zhongzhou state does? Bureau 719 of Zhongzhou state. This was a department that most people had never heard of. There was no official information about it, and its functions were absolutely vague. It was independent of any system and only answered to the president. This was a top-secret department that specialized in studying all kinds of supernatural phenomena and unsolved mysteries. Extraterrestrial civilization, extraterrestrial life, UFOs. These were things that ordinary people were familiar with but skeptical about. There was corresponding information in Bureau 719 of Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State, Star State, and all the major powers in the world had even received signals from the starry sky. For them, the so-called extraterrestrial civilization was really not a secret. Li Huaqing was not surprised that there was a starry sky life. He was surprised that the big boss of the starry sky in front of him turned out to be an acquaintance from Zhongzhou State. This feeling was really refreshing, and it also had a really nice feeling. Do your current abilities have anything to do with Bureau 719? War God suddenly asked. Li Huaqing hesitated for a moment before slowly nodding his head. He sighed softly. It's my classmate. He used to be the deputy director of Bureau 719. When I was the deputy speaker of Liaodong once found a very special meteorite with some symbols carved on it. My classmate deciphered some of the information and leaked it to me. It was some way of using spiritual power. However, what those symbols express seemed to be not realms, but power? Authority. War God gave the most accurate way to interpret it. The corner of Li Huaqing's mouth moved, but he remained silent. Your classmate should be dead, right? War God asked. Missing. Li Huaqing sighed. The day after he told me these things, he disappeared. It was a critical period for me. I was afraid that it would involve me, so I didn't dare to say it. War God sneered. Bullsh**. He's a puppet of the will of heaven and earth. He deliberately leaked this information to you in order to guide you to this path. After you break through again, you, the president, will become the spokesperson of the will of the world. At that time, with you in this position, the will of the world will once again overwhelm the luck of the human race. Zhongzhou state won't last long, and the end of the world will come early. Li Huaqing's body shook violently, and he suddenly looked up. Impossible. He thought about it, shook his head, and said, "At that time, I was just the deputy speaker of Liaodong. How could it be? What's impossible?" War God narrowed his eyes slightly and whispered, "Have you ever felt that you worked very hard to do something, but when you were one step away from success, you failed? You felt that you didn't work hard enough, so you worked harder again and tried your best to do it. But when you were one step away from success, you failed for various reasons. Sometimes, there are some things that you are not interested in, but these things try their best to get close to you. There are many things that seem to be coincidences, but they are all things that people have to experience in their life. Different experiences, different endings, different consequences. If you do it again, it will be the same. If you do it again and again, it will be the same. It's like a dead knot that can't be untied and escaped." War God's voice slightly lowered. "This is destiny. Everything, your life, what you do, what you get, what you lose, where you are, what you say, what you do. Haha, in fact, all of this has nothing to do with you at all. This was because everything had already been predestined. It was like a well-designed program. It looked very lively, but in essence, it was absolutely rigid. Everything about you was predestined. From birth to death, there will be no accidents, no coincidences. From the beginning to the end, you are under the control of the will of the world, like a puppet. This is destiny, such a fate. Are you willing to accept it?" Li Huaqing's chest slightly rose and fell. "This is the meaning of the human clan's resistance." War God said calmly, "Fate, life and death, these should be in your own hands. From the moment you accepted the spiritual authority, you already had half a foot in the order realm. Everything about you is destined to be good." "I don't believe it." Li Huaqing shook his head. "I don't believe in predestination. I don't believe that my life has nothing to do with me. That's the truth. In fact, even in the real environment, if you have half a foot into the order, there is almost no possibility of struggling. But you met Li Tianlan. That's why I said that you made the right choice to choose Li Tianlan as your successor. Because in the real environment, his real brand can completely suppress the erosion of the order and the will of the world and break this so-called predestination." "Real environment?" Li Huaqing asked. "Real brand?" Li Huaqing continued to ask. War God still nodded. Li Huaqing took a deep breath, looked at War God and said softly, "What is this? Don't you want to explain?" Chapter 1292. The hour hand on the clock pointed to 4:20 at night. It was close to dawn. Li Huaqing looked at War God, whose identity he didn't know. His mind was in a state of extreme fatigue, but at the same time, he was also in a state of extreme excitement. At this moment, he felt like a madman who was listening to another madman telling a story. Was it a story? Or the truth of the world? Order, neutral, chaos, dragon, myth, emperor, authority, world, war god, she and she by, authority, true imprint, true environment. Everything was crazily attacking his rationality and brain in a way that he had never experienced before. Li Huaqing took out a cigarette with trembling hands. He lit it and took a deep puff. As if he suddenly thought of something, he took out another cigarette from the box and handed it to War God. War God reached out his hand and opened his fingers. Li Huaqing was stunned for a moment before putting the cigarette in War God's hand. But the cigarette went through War God's palm and fell to the ground. Li Huaqing's fingers were slightly hot. He lowered his head and looked at it. He was lost in thought for a long time. His gaze moved between the cigarette on the ground and his fingertips. At this moment, both of them had already turned red with warmth. That was fresh blood. War God's blood. Li Huaqing raised his head and glanced at War God. The figure in front of him was so clear, but it wasn't a real thing. It was just an illusion. However, the blood mist that was constantly drifting from his body seemed so real when he touched it. My current essence is just a memory. It can be said to be a real existence, but it can also be said to be an illusion. War God thought for a moment and said, "It's hard for me to explain to you." Because he didn't know either. This was a new authority, a new path. Everything was just the beginning. There were still too many unknown things that War God didn't think of. Li Huaqing didn't care about this question. He took a big puff of the cigarette. Because he inhaled too hard, his throat was a bit uncomfortable. His voice was a bit hoarse. True imprint, true environment, what are they? War God frowned. He thought for a long time before coming up with a relatively easy-to-understand explanation. He said slowly, "It's the place that the worlds can't influence. There are people that the world can't influence. Worlds will." Li Huaqing frowned. He had actually known this term for a long time, but he had never been able to understand it. Anyone who wants to become stronger needs to come into contact with this world. What you want to do in this world, from the point of view of this world, is whether you can do it or not. For example, you can eat, drink, sleep, and walk. But in our eyes, we are so powerful that we can destroy the heavens and destroy the earth, and we are so insignificant that even the slightest movement requires authority. If your vitality does not allow you to walk, then you can only sit paralyzed in a wheelchair. This is the most basic ability, we call it basic authority, which is 0. Level 0 authority. As humans, we don't have to break through this level of authority like some plants. What we need is to see the truth of this world clearly and then climb to the top. Anyone who wants to increase their authority in this world and do more things will need to come into contact with the world will. Currently, of the 3 paths that we have, the earliest one is to use the world will to temper ourselves and fight head-on until the very end. Either we trample on the world will, or we die under its suppression. This path is too tragic and not everyone is suitable for it. Therefore, there is the second path, which is to deceive the world will and use lies to support the world. We walk between the real and the fake and dominate everything. As for the last path, it is to imitate the world will and control our own destiny or even replace it. But no matter how many paths there are, we have to come into contact with the world will. In real situations, the influence of the world will be greatly weakened. It's the kind that you can't imagine, such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and some natural disasters. This is almost the limit that the world will can do. The returnees build a good foundation here, choose their own path, and leave behind their own legends. When they enter the starry sky, they can better face the world will and their upper limit will be very high in the future. Li Huaqing seemed to understand a little. He opened his eyes and murmured to himself, "You mean the world, no, the starry sky. No, the entire universe has a consciousness. Or should I say, the entire universe is actually a living thing?" The god of war was silent for a moment and nodded. "That's impossible." Li Huaqing laughed in an extremely absurd manner. "Are you trying to tell me that the land under my feet, the earth, and the Milky Way all have life? How is that possible? What proof do you have?" "Of course I have proof," the god of war said and shook his head. The proof that the universe has a consciousness had actually existed a long time ago. For example, the third path of the neutral camp. However, even if he said it now, Li Huaqing couldn't understand it and the god of war couldn't explain it either. Li Huaqing waited for a while and didn't get an explanation. He nodded and said, "Okay, even if I believe you and the universe has a consciousness, why is the earth your so-called real environment? Isn't this place a part of the world? The universe does have a consciousness, but we can't be sure if the universe is a living thing. Its existence is too great. Even we can't understand it now. However, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist." The god of war said. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes. "I'm talking about the real environment. Why is the earth a real environment that the world will can't influence? The earth has a lifespan. Do you agree with this point?" The god of war suddenly said. Li Huaqing was startled and nodded. Of course. This was the truth. Scientists could already roughly estimate the lifespan of the Earth and the entire solar system. It was an astronomical number calculated in hundreds of millions of years. It was extremely far away. However, the Earth also had a lifespan. I suddenly thought of how to convince you. The god of war laughed. Since you don't deny that the earth has a lifespan, why do you deny that the earth and the universe has life? If it's not life, how do you explain the lifespan? Li Huaqing, the god of war, didn't wait for him to refute and continued. The sun also has a lifespan. Do you agree with this point? Li Huaqing silently nodded. The sun's mass isn't big. The energy it can provide is insignificant in the eyes of some peak existences. However, it is indeed a star in its prime. But all stars will eventually die. They can't escape three fates. Just like how humans will eventually become corpses, stars are the same. They will become white dwarfs, neutron stars, or black holes. Then, the entire universe, the entire starry sky also has a lifespan. Do you agree with this point? Li Huaqing remained silent. How many years does the universe have left? The current scientific community hasn't calculated this point. They can't accurately calculate it. It's even impossible to calculate it. But slowly, Li Huaqing still nodded. Then, what will happen when the universe's lifespan reaches its end? The god of war asked. Starry sky heat death? Subconsciously, Li Huaqing spat out a word. This is one of the conjectures of the current scientific community. According to the second law of thermodynamics, the degree of chaos in the universe will continue to increase. When it reaches the maximum, all the energy in the universe will be converted into heat energy. The temperature of all matter will reach a thermal equilibrium. All matter will decompose and be evenly distributed. There will no longer be any flow or conversion of energy. You're talking about entropy. The god of war said calmly. Based on the current scientific research, entropy is irreversible. However, this isn't correct. He didn't say what was incorrect. The current scientific community can't discover the so-called chaos camp. The price he has to pay to forcefully explain this might be something he can't afford. He can only tell Li Huaqing that this conclusion is wrong from the perspective of higher civilizations or other camps. Since the universe has a consciousness, how can there be some irreversible things? Li Huaqing tried hard to think. His knowledge in this area only came from a few papers he had read before. He's the president, not a scientist. Why would he study these things? The great tier of the universe? Li Huaqing asked. This is another conjecture. Matter and dark matter produce gravity. Dark energy produces repulsion. The repulsion is greater than gravity, causing the expansion of the universe to accelerate. In the end, everything in the universe will be completely torn apart by the expansion of the universe and decompose into nothingness. That's roughly what it means. Li Huaqing can't remember it clearly. Great tier, the god of war smiled. His smile was a little strange. However, Li Huaqing couldn't see it clearly in the blood mist. I've just experienced the taste of a regional great tier. It's quite strong. There was a hint of laughter in his voice. Li Huaqing felt that it was awesome. However, he didn't know if the god of war said that his body could resist the tear. However, the god of war rejected this possibility. That's the contraction of the universe? Li Huaqing asked. The theory of the cycle of time and space was also very popular. The expansion of the universe will stop and reverse after a certain extent. In the end, all the space and matter will start to collapse and become a singularity. It was equivalent to a reverse Big Bang. Time flowed backward and the universe reversed. This was the most interesting theory at the moment. It was as if the universe was playing the same story in a loop in time and space. To a certain extent, this is correct. However, it's not the truth. The god of war's voice was calm. So, Li Huaqing was a little speechless. This theory is that the universe is reincarnating. However, reincarnation isn't the end. The god of war's voice was a little vague. It's also not the final fate of the universe. So what's the final fate? Li Huaqing's tone was a little numb. I don't know. The god of war said calmly and casually. Li Huaqing's mouth kept twitching. In the end, he swallowed back the vulgarities that were about to come out of his mouth. My memory is blank. Perhaps it's because it's been too long. Perhaps it's related to the end of the world. After all, after I returned, I only found my original skin. Many thoughts and memories have disappeared. Perhaps the two of them are the only ones who know the truth about the end of the universe. However, this will have to wait until they have completely returned. Which two? Li Huaqing asked subconsciously. Then, as if he suddenly realized something, his eyes widened. Of course it's Shi and Shi Bai. The god of war smiled. They are the currently Tianlan and Qin Weibai. The real imprints on them are more complete than mine and the one from the Wang family. Li Huaqing's heart beat wildly. The god of war explained, in the beginning, when there were only a few of us left, one of us chose to live as long as heaven and earth. This was equivalent to a permanent and complete death. In other words, he was alive with no possibility of returning. His existence was equivalent to the ancestor of the current universe's human clan. The so-called universe's human clan is the current white race. And the one from the Wang family chose to become reincarnated. Because of this, although he has returned, he can't reach his peak state. My sacrifice was relatively small. I chose to become the foundation of the human clan. The skin I left behind became the world. Now it has returned to me. And Shi Bai have become the hope. That's why the so-called human clan exists now. This was the beginning. Before that, there was no such thing as the human clan. At that time, we didn't call ourselves human. In the end, the word human was nothing more than a title. At that time, I don't even remember what we were called. All that happened before the beginning. What happened after that? Li Huaqing's eyes focused. After that was the end of the world. The god of war said lightly. The surrounding air was filled with an incomparably abrupt killing intent. A ferocious and cold aura began to gather toward the god of war, extremely violent. The end of the world. Li Huaqing subconsciously stopped breathing. The world is reincarnated, but the real end and destruction are very rare. Anyway, in my memory, there was only one, but I didn't see what it looked like. It's just that in my memory, the human clan that wasn't called the human clan was different from the current one. We had an almost immortal lifespan, an incomparably perfect appearance, and there were almost no secrets in the world. Everyone back then could be said to be like gods now. That was, the god of war thought for a moment. My memory is very incomplete, but if I'm not wrong, before the end, the world should have been four-dimensional. Four-dimensional? Li Huaqing began to feel that it was very, very impressive. I'm not sure if it was four-dimensional or four-dimensional space, but I have a deeper memory. At that time, we would have an additional angle, be it in terms of seeing or doing things. At the very least, there will be an additional angle, an angle that doesn't exist now. I can ignore distance and space. At that time, if I wanted to and when I was strong enough, I could even take your heart from a galaxy away without leaving any wounds on your body. But now I can't do it. Even if it's my real body, I can't do it. I have to be at least a galaxy away to be able to do it. The god of war said in a low voice. After a long silence, he continued, that should be what the world looks like after it's destroyed. The dimension decreases, and the world ends, from four-dimensional to three-dimensional. If the world is destroyed again, this world and the endless starry sky might become two-dimensional. We will perish together with the entire world. Maybe a long, long time ago, before we were born, there were still fifth dimension, sixth dimension, or even higher. But as the world was destroyed again and again, the dimensions were reduced again and again, and finally, it became what it is now. This is just our speculation. Even now, there are too many things that we don't understand. The only thing we can do is to try our best to survive. In order to survive, we have to constantly struggle in desperate situations. To the world, we are just pitiful creatures. He raised his head and took a deep look at Li Huaqing. Do you understand now? The earth, in our words, is called the City of Miracles. This is the real environment, and the so-called real environment is the planet left after the old world was destroyed. The so-called real imprint is the people who still survived after the old world was destroyed, or who still completed the return. This is the real environment and the real imprint. It is something that the will of the world can influence to a certain extent but not completely. Other people can also have the real imprint. When a certain authority reaches the peak, It can also condense the real imprint to a certain extent to fight against the will of the world. This is also the confidence of the peak authority to protect the human clan to the greatest extent. Li Tanlan. Qin Weibai, Li Huaqing muttered to himself. After a long time, he smiled bitterly. Well, if what you said is true, he was silent for a while. In that case, why do you still fight against the world? Even want to destroy the world? To be exact, we are fighting against the will of the world. The war god said slowly, like what I said before, everything is a prearranged fate. Are you willing to accept it? When your life doesn't belong to you, and you don't even have the most instinctive thoughts and desires, are you still you? There is nothing, and you don't know if you are alive. Are you alive or dead? Li Huaqing's mouth twitched and he couldn't speak for a while. That is the absolute order. The order is so regular that you don't even know the rules. No, even the concept of yourself doesn't exist in our minds. No thoughts, no thinking, a walking corpse, lifeless, more terrible than death, more desperate. Are you willing to feel like this? Don't rush to answer me. War God said, if you are willing to accept it, you can continue to break through in the spiritual field. When you break through again, you will become a creature of order. No, it is a creature of order that will become you, because at that time, you will be gone, and all your thoughts will be gone. What you will leave is just a shell of absolute law. At that time, the will of heaven and earth of Miracle City will completely focus on you. Against the real environment of the human race and the luck of the human race, the will of the world will completely lock on to the location of Miracle City. Do you know the result? Li Huaqing swallowed his saliva. He said hoarsely, what will it be? The will of the world will feel the real environment to a certain extent, but it can't lock on to the location of the real environment. So, the limit of what it can do here is to cause some natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, plagues, tsunamis, storms, droughts, and so on. But if the location of Miracle City is locked on, then what awaits is only destruction, a fundamental destruction. With the current level of technology on Earth, you can't even take a shot from a dark energy cannon. The entire planet will completely disappear, and no life on Earth will survive. Without the real environment, it's also a huge weakening for us. This will also make it easier to deal a blow to us. So, all these years, it has been you protecting Earth? Li Huaqing felt like he was being protected by aliens, although War God wasn't an alien. Look up now, the starry sky you see is fake. War God calmly said a fact that was enough to shock the scientific world. What do you mean? Li Huaqing's hair stood on end. In the sky above Miracle City, there is my sword intent. Above my sword intent, there is Xuanyuan's sword formation. In addition, Miracle City and even the entire Milky Way space are folded by us by various means. Many of the different planets you see are just two sides of the same planet, and all this is to hide the exact location of Miracle City. Li Huaqing looked at him silently. After a while, he asked, do you think I can believe what you said? War God looked at him calmly. It doesn't matter to me whether you believe it or not. You are the president of Zhongzhou State, you currently have a lot of resources, and you can most directly help Li Tianlan. If you believe it, you can do something. This is also the reason why I greeted you. If you don't believe it, this is just a story. When the creatures of order replace you, I will kill you immediately and let Li Tianlan become the president. He has a real brand. As long as he is in the position of president, the will of heaven and earth of Zhongzhou State will be suppressed to the lowest level. That is enough. Then what are you doing here? Li Huaqing couldn't help asking. I'm here by accident. There was a flash of embarrassment in War God's eyes. He seemed to think of the time when he was trapped in the screen again. He shook his head slowly. But since I'm here, it's good to have a look. I have to see the return of Shi and Shibai. This may make up for some of my memories. If possible, I can also discuss with him about the new authority and open a road to heaven for the human clan. He paused and suddenly laughed. Besides, your current means are not very good. Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangde, Gu Xingyun. These opponents are a little weak for Li Tianlan. Since you want to help him complete the most perfect return, you naturally have to find him a strong enough opponent. War God thought for a while and suddenly laughed. In the endless crisscrossing, his body was obviously trembling because of the laughter. Strictly speaking, this is a story of a son-in-law beating his father-in-law. And as a father, I have to stand on the side of my son and watch the eager daughter-in-law. What a good family ethics drama. Li Huaqing looked confused. What son-in-law beating his father-in-law? Your son? Yes. War God nodded. But you probably haven't seen him yet. But you will see him soon. This time, I've brought Li Dongqing's sword qi and state of mind, which can help that kid open up the situation. Since Tianlan can't meet Dongqing for the time being, then let him face an opponent similar to his son. It can also be considered as letting him understand the pain his son has experienced, right? Li Huaqing murmured to himself and said as if to confirm, is it Li Tianlan's son? Isn't it obvious? War God asked. But Tianlan and Qin Weibai don't have a son yet. Moreover, Li Guangtu just said that he had seen Li Dongqing. I did it. War God admitted frankly, I took Qin Weibai and Li Guangtu to another space and time that coexists with here. That is the territory of War God's realm. Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai don't have a son here, but in my place, they do. They are peerless talents. I brought Li Dongqing's sword qi in his heyday and his state of mind here. Next, it will be a different kind of father and son competition. Another space and time, Li Huaqing was really a little numb. We cut it together. War God said, the dark world should be very lively next. You can just watch the show. I found a whetstone for Tianlan. Now, Li Huaqing smiled bitterly. A whetstone. War God raised his eyebrows. The trio you found? Jiang Shangyu used to be a little interesting, but now, do they deserve it? Chapter 1293. He was like a walking corpse. All his consciousness was in a trance, and his body seemed to be floating, without direction or purpose. With great confusion, he walked forward slowly. The headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital was shining with lights under the night sky, and it was a busy scene everywhere. Tomorrow, they would leave this place where they had been rooted for more than 2 years. Everyone was preparing to move, packing up, sorting out materials, transporting weapons, and moving out a large number of underground equipment. Although the Purgatory of Heaven capital could not be compared with the current Emperor Dong's palace, it was still a top force that was only one step away from the super force. If they wanted to complete the relocation in one day, the time could be said to be quite tight. A large number of trucks belonging to the Nanyun military region had set off from Nanyun overnight and would arrive at the Purgatory of Heaven capital in a few hours. All the materials would be transported to Nanyun, and then Li Guangtu would follow Li Huaqing to Yuzhou to report. The Purgatory Legion would be officially established, and the major groups would discuss the garrison of the Purgatory Legion and the specific responsibilities. After determining the sphere of influence, large transport vehicles would send all the current materials of the Purgatory Legion to the new garrison of the Purgatory Legion. It sounded very troublesome, but in fact, a new chapter of Li Guangtu's life had begun. It was hard to say whether he was disappointed or relieved. After being captured by Li Tianlan, the Purgatory of Heaven capital became the Purgatory Legion, and the former enemy became an ally. Being forced to leave here, there was always a feeling of being forcibly cleared out by Emperor Dong's palace. But there was always a chance. The foundation of the Purgatory of Heaven capital was still there, and this time he had a relatively reliable ally. There was no need to doubt this at all. It could be foreseen that as long as Li Tianlan was still alive, the alliance of him, Jiang Shangyu, and Gu Xingyun would be indestructible. In terms of spiritual power alone, Li Guangtu was quite close to the transcendent realm. His spiritual power had absolute explosive power, which also meant that as long as his injury was healed, he would have strength close to that of Wang Tianzong. With the end of the negotiation between Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan, Emperor Dong's palace accepted Li Huaqing's conditions. In the following period of time, Emperor Dong's palace could generally stabilize. As the Legion commander of the Purgatory Legion, Li Guangtu also had the opportunity to directly contact the special resources of Zhongzhou State. Using these special resources, he could hurry to recover from his injury. His injuries had accumulated for far too long. It had been more than 2 years since the end of the chaos in Snow Country, and his injuries had never healed. Whether it was on the night of the decisive battle in North Sea or when he forcibly besieged Li Tianlan, he was seriously injured and could only exert half of his strength at most. He had broken through to the next level, but in reality he was at the pinnacle. Even Li Kuang himself had never experienced how powerful this state was. If he had been in his peak state and besieged Li Tianlan, would it have been a different ending? This was the opportunity that Li Kuang had been waiting for a long time. He and Jiang Shangyu both had the strength beyond the peak of the invincible realm. Although Gu Xingyun had not reached this realm, his physical quality had reached their level. He was good at the domain. If they attacked again, if the three of them were in their peak state, Gu Xingyun would be the most qualified meat shield. He and Jiang Shangyu could attack again and again without much pressure. No matter how strong Li Tianlan was, he had not really reached the level of Wang Tianzong at that time. How strong could he be? As long as the three of them were in good condition, Li Kuang believed that the three of them definitely had the strength to fight with Li Tianlan head-on. After leaving Emperor Dong's palace, he had completely grasped this opportunity in his own hands. But all of this, all the anticipation, excitement, and joy, were frozen by a name. It was not Li Tianlan. It was the name he got from Li Huaqing. Li Dongqing. The name was too coincidental. It was an incredible coincidence. The moment he heard the name, Li Kuang could almost be sure of his identity. This was Li Tianlan's son. It could even be said that it was not a name, but two surnames. The surname was Li. The compound surname was Dongqing. This was the bond between Li Tianlan in the Li family and his real family. Li Tianlan had no son now. But in his own memory, Li Dongqing appeared. In that forgotten memory, he had not recalled too many things until now. But after being stimulated by Li Huaqing, he had already remembered the sword light. An extremely vague picture. A style of East Emperor and a half-style of Beihai. The almost eternal sword light crisscrossed in the flying snow in the sky and the raging fire in the ruins. It tore Mount Dibbing apart and wiped out the East Island Imperial Palace. This memory was so vague, but half of it was real and the other half was nothingness. Sword God. Li Dongqing. Li Tianlan's son. The repressed memory. The eternal sword light. In his memory, the sword light was so dazzling that it covered everything. The person who drew the sword and the people who faced the sword were all blurred. Only the sword light existed. Wherever the sword light passed, there was only extinction. Maybe he looked down on him and didn't like him before. He looked down on him and was indifferent. But he had to admit that the current Li Tianlan had become a mountain above the purgatory of heaven capital. Their positions had been reversed. The young man, who he once thought was not worthy to inherit the Li family, had already stood in the highest position, expressionless and looking down at him coldly. What Li Kuang wanted to do most now was to climb over the mountains and break the incomparably towering mountain above his head. Did the name Li Dongqing mean that even if he climbed over the mountain of Li Tianlan, what he would face next would be a mountain higher than Li Tianlan? That mountain didn't exist now. No, that mountain already existed. He even tore Mount Dibbing apart more than 2 years ago. But why did he exist? Time, identity, chosen one. There was already an unbelievable guess in his heart, but this guess was too absurd, so much so that his brain became extremely chaotic. A part of his mind was in a state of absolute rationality, while the other part of his mind was beyond reality and began to let his imagination run wild. The intense pain in his head became more and more clear. On the quiet path of the purgatory of heaven capital, Li Kuang held his head in his hands and sat on a chair, his body trembling. Uncomfortable? A voice suddenly resounded before him, and it was flat and indifferent while carrying a wisp of distance. Li Huaqing's trembling body stopped and he raised his head. In his sight, Li Huazhong, whose temples had turned white, stood in front of him. He was carrying a food box in his hand. "I'm fine." Li Kuang forced a smile and said, "I just suddenly thought of something." "What is it?" Li Huazhong's tone did not fluctuate at all. "I thought of Li Tianlan." Li Kuang chuckled and said, "Him." When I talked to him today, guess what conditions he gave me? He invited me to be the first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, and at the same time to retain all the weave of the purgatory of heaven capital. I can still lead the purgatory of heaven capital and give us the highest autonomy. Li Kuangtu laughed. Li Huazhang's eyes moved and he whispered, "You didn't agree." Li Kuangtu nodded and said, "I refused." Li Huazhang laughed, and his voice was merciless with sarcasm. "So, you are really an idiot." Chapter 1294. Li Huazhang's voice was cold and direct. He said it so straightforwardly that it seemed extremely harsh in the night. Li Kuangtu suddenly laughed. Unprecedented chaotic thoughts surged wildly in his mind. Reality, illusion, what had happened and what he imagined, all of his thoughts were in a state of boiling at the same time. He nodded in agreement and chuckled. "Indeed, I also think I'm a fool." Li Huazhang's mouth moved. Li Kuangtu said the conditions given by Li Tianlan in an understatement, but Li Huazhang clearly knew the weight of it. The first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace and the autonomy of the purgatory of heaven capital really meant too many things. It was no exaggeration to say that Li Tianlan's requirements for the purgatory of heaven capital were actually very simple, even unbelievably simple. What he asked for was that the Li family's position should be unified in the general direction, and he didn't want to interfere with the purgatory of heaven capital. He was even willing to give a part of the power and interests of Emperor Dong's palace to the purgatory of heaven capital, and the purgatory of heaven capital only needed to recognize his position as the patriarch of the Li family and stand with Emperor Dong's palace at the critical moment. That was enough. This was not even an incorporation, but a cooperation. How many benefits and resources did the first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace mean? These were given for free, and Li Tianlan let the purgatory of heaven capital maintain its autonomy. After taking the interests of the other party, it was reasonable to stand with the other party. There was nothing wrong with it. Li Tianlan just wanted to end the state of the Li family's division. As for other aspects, such conditions could even be regarded as a concession by Emperor Dong's palace. Thousands of words in his heart rushed to his mouth. Li Huazhang took a deep breath and swallowed all the topics. He could understand these things in the first place, and he didn't believe that Li Kuangtu didn't understand. But Li Kuangtu still refused. What was the point of saying these things? Suppressing some of the inner contradictory emotions in his heart again, Li Huazhang twitched the corner of his mouth and continued to sneer. "What? Look at you, are you regretting it?" The relationship between Li Kuangtu and Li Huazhang had never been good. The parents of this military counselor of the Li family had died a long time ago, and he was brought up by Li Honghe. Logically speaking, he and Li Kuangtu grew up together, so they should have been very close. However, the two cousins seemed to be incompatible. They quarreled with each other from childhood to adolescence, and then to young men. They had fought with each other more than once. Li Huazhang's talent was not outstanding, and he was 2 years younger than Li Kuangtu. When he was young, he was robbed of his toys and food, but he could barely compete with this cousin. When they became teenagers and began to learn martial arts, the gap between them began to widen. Every time the two brothers fought, Li Huazhang was the first one with a black nose and a swollen face, and then Li Kuangtu was beaten by Li Honghe. The two of them had many memories of each other. Most of them were quarreling, fighting, and getting beaten up if they couldn't win. After the fight, they still got beaten up. Both of them hated each other. From adolescence to adulthood, this relationship began to change gradually. When they grew up, Li Huazhang became cunning and began to play dirty. In terms of martial arts, he was not as good as his cousin. But when it came to scheming, Li Huazhang at that time was far ahead of Li Kuangtu. When the two were in college, Li Huazhang completely used all kinds of tricks to make Li Kuangtu unhappy. As long as it could make Li Kuangtu feel disgusted, Li Huazhang did it. Although he would still be beaten black and blue in the end, it was still not a loss. Later, the Li family was destroyed, and Li Kuangtu lurked in East Island. A few years later, Li Huazhang secretly joined the purgatory of heaven capital from the border. Until now, the relationship between the two was not harmonious. Of course, There was no hatred, but the habit of making trouble for each other had become a kind of instinct. Therefore, Li Guangtu was arranged to be a senior staff officer in the Purgatory of Heaven capital by Li Guangtu. It was a high level, not the highest level, but a core position, but a relatively marginal position in the core. But in fact, every time there was something important, Li Guangtu would carefully ask for Li Huazhang's opinion, and Li Huazhang, who knew when to play and when to be serious, had never failed. After so many years, this was a tacit understanding between the two. Regret? Li Guangtu muttered to himself. He shook his head, nodded, and continued to smile. I do regret it a little. Don't you think it's a little late? Li Huazhang's voice was cold. It's not too late. Li Guangtu said calmly, if I join Emperor Dong's palace and become the first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, I will still have the final say in the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and all the forces of the Li family will be completely integrated. The position of the first deputy palace lord can bring a lot of benefits to the Purgatory of Heaven capital, even unimaginable benefits. The Purgatory of Heaven capital can quickly strengthen itself with the power of Emperor Dong's palace, but at the same time, the Purgatory of Heaven capital will be better integrated into Emperor Dong's palace. The two will become one. In the short term, there may be some estrangement in a few years, but as time goes by, in 5 or 10 years, the Purgatory of Heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace will definitely be inseparable. This is what Li Tianlan wants to see. There is not much calculation about ambition. In this respect, he is relatively simple. He thinks that he is the patriarch of the Li family and has the obligation to unite the forces of the Li family, that's all. For the Li family, he is willing to make some concessions to a certain extent. Li Huazhang looked at him silently. Li Guangtu took a deep breath and said lightly, I do regret it. But if I have to do it again, I will still refuse. I understand. Li Huazhang said blandly, you don't want to submit to others. Now that you have the support of Gu Xingyun and Jiang Shangyu, it's inevitable that you want to fight with Tianlan. Do you think you still have hope? Support? Li Guangtu frowned. Li Huazhang sneered. If not, why are you so eager to stick to him? You can continue to walk around here and ask around to see what some people are talking about you now. Gu Xingyun. Who does Gu Xingyun think he is? Let's go back more than 20 years. The whole Gu family is a dog at the feet of our Li family. Don't forget who destroyed the Li family, who slandered you for treason, and who made you endure in East Island for so many years. You can let go of these, but the Li family has endured humiliation for so many years. So many lives have been lost, and everything the Li family has borne. Who do you think you are? How can you let go? When Uncle took us to hide at the border, what was Gu Xingyun doing? He dared to cooperate with Annan when his foundation was not stable. He sent the experts of Kunlun City to bleed the Li family with Annan. When the Li family collapsed, how many families were ruined and how many wives and children were separated? King endured in East Island and recultivated martial arts. You had wine, meat, and women. What about us? What kind of life did those brothers who came out in recent years live? What's all this for? It's all because of the stupid things you did. Who gave you all this? It's Gu Xingyun. How much does the Gu family owe our Li family? How many lives? Now you have made a statement, and the enemy has become a partner. You want to turn around and fight your own people? The person who hurt you is Gu Xingyun, not Tianlan, not Emperor Dong's palace. What on earth are you doing? Just because eldest uncle didn't let you be the clan leader of the Li family, just because Tianlan has surpassed you in all aspects, so you're not convinced, indignant, and unwilling? Li Guangtu, how selfish do you have to be willing to lick Gu Xingyun's ass, and then turn around to deal with the real Li family? Tell me. Let you be the first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace and continue to be in charge of the Samsara palace. Don't you know what the future will be like? You said some time ago that Rushi was in good condition and that he would wake up or even fully recover in 2 years. The Purgatory of Heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace may be different in the hands of you and Tianlan. But as time goes by, the relationship between you and Rushi will become closer and closer. When Tianlan and Rushi's child is born, who will care about these things? At that time, Emperor Dong's palace would be the Purgatory of Heaven capital, and the Purgatory of Heaven capital would be Emperor Dong's palace. In the end, they were all the Li family. You refused? You still have the cheek to say that you refused? If you were given another chance, would you still refuse? I gave you face, but you don't want it. What are you thinking? He was raining insults on Li Guangtu. Li Huazhang had always been steady and gentle, and his style was extremely elegant. Only when facing Li Guangtu would he break out of it. But such a merciless abuse was completely different from the previous quarrels between them. For both sides, this was the first time. In the night, Li Huazhang's face seemed to turn red because he was too excited. He kept taking deep breaths, and it took him 5 or 6 minutes to calm down. What you're doing now has nothing to do with the Li family. Maybe we don't know you very well. What you want is not the glory of the Li family. What you want is just the glory of the Li family led by you. You're my cousin. I don't want to judge you, but I hope you can know what you've given up today. An opportunity for the Li family to surpass the peak and make the Li family complete again. But you, because of your ridiculous selfishness, you refused. I don't know what will happen in the future. But what is certain is that if the Li family's future glory is like the sun in the sky, it will have nothing to do with you, Li Guangtu. If the Li family falls on the way to the peak in the future, then you, Li Guangtu, must be the Li family's eternal sinner. His tone was cold and indifferent, without any excitement. But Li Guangtu's facial muscles twitched fiercely. Few people could understand his feelings for the Li family. Li Guangtu never denied that he was selfish, but he was also very sincere about his feelings for the Li family. Li Huazhang's words were like a knife stabbing into his chest one after another. He was bleeding, and the unparalleled pain seemed to tear his consciousness. He wanted to explain something. He wanted to explain that Li Huaqing would not agree to his promise to Li Tianlan. He wanted to explain that once he agreed to Li Tianlan's conditions, the whole Li family would be in crisis. He wanted to explain something else. In fact, there were many things that could be explained. But when the words came to his mouth, Li Guangtu chose to remain silent. Because all the things that could be explained, including the fact that Qin Weibai killed Huawu, were not the real reason why he refused Li Tianlan. The real reason was right in front of him, and he couldn't look at it directly. But he knew very well that the reason why he refused Li Tianlan was because he was unwilling, or selfish. Everything is just temporary. Li Guangtu was silent for a long time, and then slowly said, I swear, I will let Gu Xingyun pay the price he can't imagine. I will let him pay back double, 10 times, 100 times for everything he has done to the Li family. Perhaps he used this reason to persuade himself to cooperate with Gu Xingyun. At that time, Li Guangtu vowed that one day when he regained control of the Li family and overthrew Li Tianlan, he would cut the whole Gu family into pieces to complete the most thorough revenge. Li Huazhang smiled. His voice was colder and more alienated. Whatever. In the night, Li Guangtu heard his cousin's light voice, with a kind of carelessness. If I'm right, there is a premise for these words. That is, after you get rid of Tianlan, right? If that's the case, I sincerely hope that you'll never succeed. You don't need to tell me this. After dawn, see how many people are willing to go with you. You can tell them as many times as you want. When a lie can even deceive yourself, it is still somewhat convincing. And, Li Huazhang's voice paused, and then he said lightly, there is no need for you to take revenge. This is our Li family's business. Tianlan will do well in the future. You don't have to worry about this. Li Guangtu's eyes became extremely dangerous in an instant. This sentence was light, but it directly poked his sore spot. What do you mean by your Li family's business? Li Huazhang looked at him calmly. No one wants to treat you as an outsider. It is you who regard yourself as an outsider. I am not the patriarch of the Li family, and I can't represent others. But in my heart, you have nothing to do with the Li family now. I have no other purpose today. I just came to say goodbye to you. I will officially leave the Purgatory of Heaven capital. I will leave now. In addition to me, White Fox, Qianji, and Qilin will also go with me. They are now waiting for me at the gate. It is estimated that when you officially leave Tianan, we will also arrive at Emperor Dong's palace. Li Huazhang said quietly, "Of course, there is another possibility. If you kill us all now, we will never arrive at Emperor Dong's palace." The corner of Li Guangtu's mouth twitched fiercely. Li Huazhang, White Fox, Qianji Qilin. There were about 10 people in total, all of whom were with Li Huazhang. And these people were all senior staff officers of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. From another perspective, this was equivalent to the top think tank of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Of course, it was also the think tank of the Li family. If any of these people left, it would be a loss that could not be ignored for the Purgatory of Heaven capital. He opened his mouth, raised his hand and put it down, and finally waved his hand. "I won't kill you." Li Huazhang smiled and said, "I know you dare not." At this moment he seemed to have completely calmed down and restored the instinct that he had maintained for many years. He would seize the opportunity to disgust his cousin. Li Guangtu glanced at him. If he killed Li Huazhang here, Li Tianlan would be furious and attack him after he found out. He might not be able to kill him directly, but he would not hesitate to kill a group of high-level officials of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. From this logic, it was right that he did not dare to kill Li Huazhang. But Li Guangtu really did not think about this so-called logic. He simply couldn't bring himself to do it. After all, he was a member of the Li family. His eyes wandered and finally fell on the food box in Li Huazhang's hand. Was this the last meal and the last glass of wine for the two brothers before they left? Or maybe it was the last glass of wine in this life. Li Guangtu laughed at himself, raised his chin, and gestured to the food box in Li Huazhang's hand. Li Huazhang was stunned and then laughed. "If you really want to disgust me, then I admit that I was indeed disgusted by you this time." He took a step forward and put the food box in his hand beside Li Guangtu. "Here you are." Li Guangtu frowned. The food box was ordinary and not expensive. It belonged to the standard of dozens of yuan in Zhongzhou State. He reached out and casually opened the lid of the food box. He took a look and suddenly fell silent. There was no last meal between the brothers. The food box was empty. "I just packed up and went to the canteen to eat something." You may not know that all kinds of daily necessities in the canteen, in the Purgatory of Heaven capital, are sent by Tianlan from Emperor Dong's palace. Clothing, food, housing, and transportation are much better than when you were here. So in the canteen just now, I didn't eat your food, and I didn't need to spit it out. As for before, I ate your food, and I also helped you, so we don't owe each other anything. If you like this food box, I'll give it back to you." Li Guangtu stared at the food box in front of him and suddenly said, "If you deliberately disgust me, you've succeeded." Li Huazhang laughed. His smile was a little sad and he whispered, "It won't happen in the future. When we meet again, we will be real enemies. At that time, you don't have to be merciful. Even if I die in your hands, I won't say anything bad about you when I go down and meet my uncle." Li Guangtu's fingers touched the food box gently. A subtle sword energy appeared and completely crushed the food box. Li Huazhang took a deep look at Li Guangtu. He seemed to want to say something, but it was meaningless to say more. He nodded, turned around, and said, "Let's go. Take care." The dawn of Tian'an began to gradually brighten, and the night gradually became hazy in the morning light. Li Guangtu sat silently on the bench, watching Li Huazhang's figure getting farther and farther in the hazy light. From beginning to end, his footsteps were steady and he did not look back. Some came to say goodbye, and some didn't. After dawn, the Purgatory of Heaven capital would completely cease to exist. What would appear in the dark world would be a brand new force supported by the Parliament of Zhongzhou State. The Purgatory Army. Li Guangtu's extremely weak mental strength spread around little by little. He saw Li Huazhang walk out of the gate with the Li family's think tank. He saw some other veterans packing up and preparing to leave. He saw the huge amount of materials piled up in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. He saw Dawn, who was walking over with a pale face and weak breath, not far away. Another group of people left the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Li Huazhang's departure seemed to be a signal. More and more people left, but it seemed that no one intended to come to say goodbye to him. Li Guangtu took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and smoked silently. With light footsteps, Don, who was seriously injured, slowly walked over. He stood in front of Li Kuangtu, moved the corner of his mouth, and whispered, "Brother." Li Kuangtu nodded and said slowly, "How's the packing going?" "Almost done." Don took a breath and said, "Tidy it up. Since it's a big gift, it should look like a big gift." Li Kuangtu said, "What big gift?" Don looked at Li Kuangtu with some doubts. Li Kuangtu laughed. "It's what we're sorting out now. All the materials and industries of the purgatory of heaven capital. If we give them all to Li Tianlun, do you think it's a big gift?" Chapter 1295. Li Ming subconsciously opened his mouth and stared at Li Kuangtu. He was speechless for a while. Give all the materials and industries of the purgatory of heaven capital to Li Tianlun? This was not just a great gift, it was equivalent to giving away a top force for free. Absurdity and astonishment filled his eyes. Don closed his mouth, then opened it again. After hesitating for a few seconds, he couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Brother, are you crazy?" He suddenly thought of a possibility, and his expression suddenly changed. He carefully stared at Li Kuangtu's pupils. "Have you been hypnotized? I heard that the demoness in Emperor Dong's palace is very good at spiritual power." "No, she hasn't reached the transcendent realm yet. I'm very sober," Li Kuangtu said lightly, "but you're wrong about one thing. That demoness has made a breakthrough in her mental power. She's now in the transcendent realm. Although her mental power isn't stable at the moment, she can be said to be the first person in the world in the field of mental power, second only to the Saint Emperor." Don was in a daze for half a minute before he muttered to himself, "Transcendent realm." The wind in the morning seemed to suddenly become much sharper. The air current blew past his body, and Don felt his scalp go numb. The invincible young Dong Huang, who had already climbed to the top of the divine list. Situ Zhongyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou state, had obediently handed over all her power after joining Emperor Dong's palace. The holy disciple of the Nirvana sword master had made rapid progress in the field of sword principle and had stabilized his realm. Li Shi, who had been at the peak of the invincible realm more than 20 years ago and had been the actual #1 expert in Kunlun City for more than 20 years. Lin Yuxian, whose code name was Nightmare, Li Beidan, who made rapid progress in Kendo by Yuming of the half-step invincible realm, Fireman of the strongest fire-flaming realm, Qing Feng, Drifting Cloud, Serene Dream, Sky Eagle, Qing Yi, Black Tortoise. Perhaps half a year later, or perhaps a year later, there would be another Situ Wanjia. Now, there was another Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai of the Transcendent Realm. Transcendent Realm. Qin Weibai. This word and this name alone were enough to frighten people. When they were combined, it was a complete nightmare for the enemies of Emperor Dong's palace. Such a Emperor Dong's palace. Don really wanted to refuse to accept it, even if it was just verbally, but now, Li Ming couldn't say anything even though he was trying to say it. This kind of Emperor Dong's palace really gave him a sense of majesty that he could not look directly at. It had a suffocating pressure that even made people unable to resist. Scared? Li Kuangtu glanced at Don. It was unknown if it was because of this news, but Don's pale face became even paler due to his serious injuries. Don nodded obediently. Afraid? How could he not be afraid? The top of the half-step invincible realm. It was quite remarkable to mention it in the Dark World. At least if the name Don spread out, he would not be a nobody in the Dark World. But compared with the luxurious and suffocating lineup in Emperor Dong's palace, the so-called half-step invincible realm was really not very eye-catching. It was bullshit to say that he was not afraid. Me too, Li Kuangtu chuckled, but no matter how scared I am, sometimes I can't retreat. Li Ming also smiled. This kind of smile bloomed on his handsome face, with a kind of simple and honest look. Then we won't retreat. Li Kuangtu leaned against the back of the chair behind him, looking at the sky where the night and the morning light intertwined. His tense body slowly relaxed. Li Huazhang said a lot to him. But since he had made up his mind, Li Kuangtu was too lazy to think about it. What kind of person was he? What kind of person was he in the eyes of others? He used to think that this kind of evaluation from others was very important. But now, he suddenly felt that it didn't matter. Whether he was selfish, paranoid, or a sinner, calling him selfish, despicable, insidious, and vicious, it didn't matter. No matter what kind of person he was, there would always be someone standing by him, even if it was a mountain of knives or a sea of fire. Tell me, what kind of person am I? Li Guangtu suddenly asked. Li Ming's smile was calm. You are my brother. Other things were not important, so he didn't think about it. Li Guangtu was silent for a moment, and suddenly stood up from the chair. Let's go to the front and have a look. This was the rear of the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, a residential area. At this time, although every house was brightly lit, it was still quiet. The daily work area in front of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was really lively. Even here, a clear roar could be heard. All the laboratories in the underground of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were opened, and a large number of equipment was constantly moved out and placed neatly on the square in front of the headquarters. A small half of the square had been neatly laid with all kinds of equipment. Because there were too many equipment in front of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, in addition to the engineering team, even manpower was used. Some experts of the thundershocking realm were carefully controlling their strength, lifting a brand new instrument from the ground and putting it on a thick layer of foam on the ground. Li Guangtu took a look. The instrument was not big, weighing dozens of kilograms, but it was something that Li Guangtu had an impression of. It should be a component of the set of equipment in the biological laboratory of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. It should have the function of plant purification. The biological laboratory of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was far from the top in terms of technology. Most of the time, it could only rely on the equipment to make up for the gap. It could not make up for the gap with the Wang family of Beihai in Zhongzhou State. The gene potion produced by the Purgatory of Heaven Capital could only be compared with those forces that could not afford or were reluctant to buy better equipment. Therefore, the seller asked for 25 million yuan more than a year ago for this small component from Germanic. Even now, it was still the top equipment. The gene potion produced in the biological laboratory of the major forces would also be sold in batches in the dark world. The potion produced by the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, which bought the top equipment but did not have enough technology, was popular among some stragglers in the dark world. For them, they could not afford and were reluctant to buy the things produced by the Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace. The potion made by the Purgatory of Heaven Capital with the best equipment could be said to be the best thing that could be bought within the acceptable price range. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital could be regarded as a small profit but a large turnover. However, since the purchase of this set of equipment, it had not even recovered the cost, let alone made money. A component of the whole equipment cost more than 20 million yuan. It could be imagined what an astronomical price it was. If this thing is given to Emperor Dong's palace, it is enough for Li Tianlan to build another biological laboratory. Li Guangtu said softly. Brother, Dong's face changed. I can't figure it out. Li Guangtu glanced at him. You just said that we won't retreat. Dong said slowly. We really won't retreat. Li Guangtu nodded. But it doesn't mean that we can't admit defeat. There was a strange smile in his voice. I'm going to admit defeat. I have to go out temporarily. That's all for today. Try to write more tomorrow. Chapter 1296. Admit defeat, Dawn murmured to himself, as if he was carefully tasting the weight of these two words. It didn't matter whether he admitted defeat or not. Anyone could see the strength of Emperor Dong's palace and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital now as long as he was not a fool. However, whether he admitted defeat or not also had great significance. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital was indeed not as good as Emperor Dong's palace, and even had to cooperate with its enemy to resist the pressure brought by Li Tianlan. But as long as Li Guangtu did not say anything and clenched his teeth, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital would still be the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. But now, Li Guangtu wanted to admit defeat. This also meant that in the future, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital would really become a pure purgatory army. Dawn did not rush to oppose, Nor did he agree. He was silent for about a minute, then suddenly asked, "Brother, if you admit defeat, what will happen to Huawu in the future?" "Do as you wish." Li Kuangtu was silent for a while, then said softly, "Huo is my son. I will achieve something in the future, so I don't have to worry about his future. Even if I fail and Huo loses his family, so what? Can't my son experience the story of the decline of his family? The purgatory of heaven capital doesn't raise good-for-nothings. My son can't be a good-for-nothing who can only achieve success by relying on his father. Don't worry about Li Tianlan. I can be sure of this. Even if I die in Li Tianlan's hands in the future, he won't attack Huawu." Daybreak looked at him, quietly, and did not speak for a long time. "What's wrong?" Li Kuangtu felt that his little brother's eyes were a little strange. "Of course, Tianlan won't attack Huo." Dawn's voice was very soft. In fact, in the purgatory of heaven capital, even Daybreak and Dawn, who were most loyal to Li Kuangtu, and even Phoenix, had no hostility to Li Tianlan. They were indeed Li Kuangtu's people, but they were also members of the Li family. Just like the elders of the Li family standing next to Li Tianlan now regarded Li Kuangtu, they would be angry at his cooperation with Gu Xingyun, but it was really impossible to say that they hated Li Kuangtu and wanted to kill him. The real elders of the Li family had a complicated and entangled attitude towards Li Kuangtu and Li Tianlan. Only those who were absorbed into the purgatory of heaven capital later wanted Li Tianlan to die quickly so that they could accept everything in Emperor Dong's palace. In addition to these people, it was estimated that only Li Kuangtu and Li Tianlan wanted to kill each other. Dong Huang is a man who believes that he is invincible and believes that he can defeat the whole world by himself. This kind of confidence makes him disdain to eliminate the root of the problem. He doesn't even care about threats. Huawu is Rushi's brother after all. If we lose, he probably won't do anything to Huawu even for Rushi's sake. Dawn's voice was lowered in the dim light. But Tianlan won't do it? What about the others? Just as the real people of the Li family would not be hostile to Li Tianlan and Li Kuangtu, and the people who were absorbed into the purgatory of heaven capital later hoped that Li Tianlan would die quickly, the composition of Emperor Dong's palace was also relatively complicated. There was the former power of the Li family, Jade Pool of Mount Shu, Sai City, the Giant Group, and most importantly, the former subordinates of the Samsara Palace, which currently occupied the main part. These people? Except for the elders of the Li family, how could the others have a good impression of the purgatory of heaven capital? Tianlan can dominate Emperor Dong's palace, but as a leader, an unscrupulous leader is definitely not qualified. Even leaders sometimes need to compromise and have their own helplessness and difficulties. If we admit defeat this time, the future of the purgatory of heaven capital will be unpredictable. If we lose and all of us die, what will happen to Huawu? Tianlan won't kill him. But what if Ning Qianxing wants to kill him? What if Li Beidian wants to kill him? These two people accompanied Tianlan when he first entered the secular world. In the past few years, Tianlan grew so fast that they couldn't keep up with Tianlan's pace and lost some sense of existence. But now, their status in Emperor Dong's palace had become more and more important. Ning Qianxing's martial arts talent was relatively ordinary. Now he had even given up martial arts. As long as he had no crooked thoughts, he was destined to be the leader of the new group in the future. A member of Parliament of Zhongzhou State was at most a starting point. If what you said is true, Big Brother, and Li Huaqing intends to let Li Tianlan take over, Emperor Dong's palace will develop smoothly. 20 years later, an extremely powerful Emperor Dong's palace and the new group will not only push Li Tianlan to the position of president, but also push Ning Qianxing to the position of prime minister. What kind of concept is this? Li Beidian, Great Void Sword Master, the last Great Void Sword Master of Mount Shu, was at the peak of the invincible realm 100 years ago. In his heyday, his ranking on the divine list even surpassed the Wang family of Beihai and ranked second only to the Li family. How dazzling was Li Beidian now among the younger generation of Zhongzhou State? Tianlan didn't count, Jiang Shangyu and Wang Xingxiao didn't count. Next were Li Beidian and Lin Yuxian. As long as Li Beidian didn't die, he would at least reach the peak of the invincible realm in the future. These two people could be said to be the core of Emperor Dong's palace. Although for various reasons, they were not deputy palace masters, their status was no less than that of deputy palace masters. These two people were also the most representative figures. As the team members who followed Tianlan from the beginning, if they insisted on killing Huawu or did it first and reported later, what could Tianlan do then? In any case, he couldn't kill them to pay for Huawu's life. Li Beidian, Ning Qianxing. These two were indeed very representative figures. Li Guangde took a light breath and said slowly, "That's why I chose to admit defeat." You're right. Li Beidian and Ning Qianxing are indeed representative figures. But you didn't mention the more representative figures. Dawn thought of the demoness in Emperor Dong's palace who had now entered the transcendent realm, and his heart turned cold. Transcendent realm. This also meant that even if Li Guangde could directly break through tonight and officially enter that supreme realm, he couldn't do anything to him. Not to mention Li Beidian and Ning Qianxing. If necessary, if Qin Weibai really wanted to kill Huawu, she would kill him. At that time, Li Tianlan wouldn't even bear to say a harsh word. Big brother's admitting defeat. Dawn seemed to gradually understand. Is it to her? Li Guangde admitted defeat to Li Tianlan. In fact, he admitted defeat to Qin Weibai. He was not convinced, but in the current situation he admitted defeat. Dawn thought again and said slowly, "It's useless." "You're wrong." Li Guangde shook his head. Dawn was a little impatient. "Big brother, you're silly. In terms of ruthlessness, probably no one can compare with that woman. Her gentle mind is used on Tianlan, but only on her. Don't you know how she treats other people? Don't you know? As long as necessary, the whole world can be her pawn. In the chaos of Snow Country, those invincible realm experts died one by one. Doesn't that explain everything? Only when she was with Li Tianlan, Qin Weibai was a woman. In the face of the dark world, Qin Weibai was a goddess. The whole dark world recognized this title. With admiration and awe. Gods had no emotions and were high above. It was a kind of extreme indifference that isolated heaven and earth. What you said makes sense. Li Guangde said softly, "If it was before today, I would agree with you. But now it's different." He smiled softly. She is already in the transcendent realm. Dawn froze for a moment and froze in place. The transcendent realm means too many things. When her spiritual power reaches the peak, she can even modify her memory and cognition. If I fail in the future, I will definitely die, but Huawu may not. Even if his existence may be a threat in the eyes of that siren, Rushi and Li Tianlan are still there. With her character of wanting to please Li Tianlan in everything she does, she has many ways to eliminate the threat that Huawu may pose. If she didn't enter the transcendent realm, Huawu would definitely die in her hands. But now it's different. At least it's worth a gamble. If I fail in the future, it's good that Huawu can live. Moon God. Li Guangde's eyes dimmed for a moment. He gritted his teeth and said, "Rushi is still there. His life won't be too bad. Maybe some memories will be changed, but it's not bad. I don't want to enter Emperor Dong's palace. It's my obsession to cooperate with the enemy. This life is too tiring." The brilliant sword light flashed in his mind again. The sword light that was enough to tear heaven and earth fell on the palace of Beihai and East Island. It ran through day and night, real and illusory. In terms of power, that sword light was comparable to the eternal stroke above Mormon's. In terms of the purity and strength of the sword energy, that sword was the only one that Li Guangde had seen in his life. But in that sword light, Li Guangde could only feel endless exhaustion and loneliness, bleak and deathly stillness. Li Guangde's voice was lower. "I don't want my son to be so tired, or even more tired than me." Got it. Dawn looked at Li Guangde. He had been with Li Guangde since he was a teenager. He had seen his youthful frivolity, his high-spirited spirit, his arrogance and indulgence when he was invincible, and his forbearance and silence when he was down and out. In his impression, this big brother would always straighten his body and stand in the place where the undercurrent was the fiercest. He was cold and proud, planning his life in an almost extreme way and evaluating all the things in the world. Until now. Until tonight. Until this morning. Under the lights of the purgatory of heaven capital, on the square, he was still standing. The pale white dawn light and the dim yellow light shone on him. For the first time, Dawn found that Li Kuangtu's white hair on his temples was not dyed because he had been held captive for too long. For the first time, he found that his figure was not straight, but a little stooped. He admitted defeat. He admitted defeat to Emperor Dong's palace. He admitted defeat to Li Tianlan. He walked out of the position that he had been paranoid for decades and considered different problems from a different perspective. As a father, as a husband, and from the standpoint of the entire Li family. He just stood there quietly. He still carried his obsession with him. At this moment, Dawn did not see any weakness in him. What he saw was relief, relaxation, and a touch of determination that seemed to burn all his life and soul. Dawn suddenly smiled. He did not intend to say anything more, so he nodded. I see. Li Kuangtu turned to look at Dawn with gentle eyes. Is Daybreak still in a coma? Yes. Dawn nodded. He hasn't woken up. Tianlan didn't intend to kill him, but his injury is still very serious. He will probably be in a coma these days, and then he needs to recuperate for a period of time. Unfortunately, there is not much time left for him. But it's the same for you. Li Kuangtu smiled. What do you want? You can tell me now. As long as I have it, I can give it to you. Dawn frowned. Li Kuangtu continued to smile. Don't get me wrong. I just suddenly thought of it and asked casually. You can also not want anything. Then I don't want it. Dawn nodded without hesitation. Even if I want it, what can I want? For example, astronomical money, some industries that make a lot of money every day, or, what's the point? Dawn interrupted Li Kuangtu's words. It's meaningless. We haven't married in our lives, and we have no children. Those things are useless. We've played with beautiful women, not thousands, but hundreds of them, including stars, models, school belle, stewardesses, daughters of rich families, and all kinds of women. We've tasted the best wine and meat. I'm a vegetarian now. The most expensive luxury cars. Speaking of this, I drank too much in East Island some time ago. At that time, I forgot where I left a Ferrari, and then I didn't remember it at all. Speaking of money, a few years ago in Las Vegas, I lost nearly 9 figures in one night, and I didn't feel anything. Speaking of power, the purgatory of heaven capital is so big. Except for you and Daybreak, oh, and Phoenix, there are no other people and things that I can't control. There are only people and things that I can't control. Dawn took out a cigarette and lit it. It's boring. So I don't want anything. Daybreak thinks the same, I'm sure. You're the big brother, so you've decided to go all the way, so let's go all the way together. If you win, we don't have to worry about retirement, nor do we have to worry about wealth. If you lose, then when it's time to die, we'll die together. Li Kuangtu opened his mouth, which seemed to affect his injury. He coughed, pointed at Dawn, and said with a smile, when it's time to die, we'll die together. That's good. Right? Dawn also laughed, choked by the smoke, and began to cough. Their bodies trembled, and they looked like 2 idiots. This made a middle-aged man on the edge of the square, who was about to come over, hesitate. He stood where he was, a little hesitant. Li Kuangtu glanced at him, smiled, and waved. Chenyu, what's the matter? Li Chenyu came over, touched his hair, and responded in a low voice. Are you leaving? Li Kuangtu smiled, and he didn't seem angry at all. He was a veteran of the Li family, but when the Li family collapsed, his position was not important. At that time, he was less than 30 years old and had just entered the thunder-shocking realm. He was the kind of person who had entered the Li family's sight but was not a core combatant. Later, he followed Li Honghe to the border. After so many years, he had become one of the core members of the Li family. Li Kuangtu was very familiar with him. Li Chenyu's last promotion was promoted by him. Li Chenyu nodded and said in a low voice, It's time to go. Tut, Li Kuangtu shook his head. I feel a little uncomfortable, but it's not that I don't understand you. I just feel that I lost to that old man again. Li Chenyu went to the purgatory of heaven capital from the border about 7 years ago. About a year later, Li Tianlan officially entered the secular world. In other words, he was one of the last people to leave the border, which also meant that he was one of the veterans of the Li family who was most familiar with Li Tianlan. At that time, Li Chenyu was Li Guangtu's man. Li Honghe had stayed at the border with him for so many years. Obviously, his position had shifted to Li Honghe and Li Tianlan. Li Chenyu hesitated and said, "You've lost many times." Li Guangtu was stunned and nodded. "That's right. If I lose too many times, I shouldn't care too much, right?" Li Chenyu did not speak. "Are you leaving? Or are all of your groups leaving?" Li Guangtu asked. Li Chenyu hesitated and said, "All of them." Li Guangtu nodded and said yes. There were too many veterans of the Li family in the purgatory of Heaven Capital, so it was not easy to arrange the positions. So there were more groups. They were not big, but they had high privileges and enjoyed good treatment. Li Chenyu's group was made of 15 people. At present, there were 12 people left, all of whom were veterans of the Li family. All of them left, which also showed his attitude. However, Li Guangtu was a little numb now. He did not know how many people had left the purgatory of Heaven Capital that night. Li Huazhang and Li Chenyu would come to say goodbye to him. More people left without saying goodbye. It didn't matter. Huazhang left too early. Li Guangtu shook his head. "When he left, I hadn't made up my mind. But since you're here, you can stay." Li Chenyu looked calm and did not panic at all. He just said quietly, "If your highness wants to kill me, I won't resist." "You're my brother." Li Guangtu looked at him. "At least before today, you were my brother. Why would I kill you? Chenyu, I can trust you. Since you haven't left at this time, you might as well leave a few days later. The purgatory of Heaven Capital will withdraw from Tiannan, and Emperor Dong's palace will take over here. However, Emperor Dong's palace now lacks talents in the field of official conduct. I guess in a few days, Huazhang will come back with the will of Emperor Dong's palace. You stay here these days. At that time, you can go to Emperor Dong's palace after the handover." Li Chenyu frowned and asked in confusion, "What does your highness mean?" "Nothing." Li Guangtu shook his head. He held a cigarette and pointed to the materials piled up on the square. "These things, all the materials and all the current industries of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, all the wealth, some intelligence, connections, business. That's probably it. In short, I don't want everything in the purgatory of Heaven Capital. You're my brother, so please do me a favor. Pack them up and send them to Emperor Dong's palace. Well, the industries in the purgatory of Heaven Capital are more troublesome. I'll let Phoenix stay to help you complete the handover with Emperor Dong's palace." Li Chenyu looked at Li Guangtu in astonishment, as if he were looking at a madman. "Send all these things to Emperor Dong's palace? Send?" If they were all sent, Li Chenyu couldn't help but say, "Without these, what else is there in the purgatory of Heaven Capital?" "There is no purgatory of Heaven Capital." Li Guangtu looked at him gently. "From today on, the Li family will be reunited. I won't take anything from the purgatory of Heaven Capital. The combatants can leave if they want. I will take Daybreak, Dawn, Phoenix, and some people who are willing to go with me. I will officially announce to the Dark World that Li Guangtu will officially withdraw from the Li family from today, and all those who are willing to go with me will also officially withdraw from the Li family. The power of the Li family in my hands will be completely handed over to Li Tianlan. That's about it." Li Chenyu looked at him with a look of disbelief. "The winner takes all, and I'm willing to make this decision. I admit my failure. What qualification does a loser have to be the patriarch of the Li family? Li Tianlan is the winner. I recognize him as the patriarch. I'll give everything to him. Next, I'll use my own way to take these back from him. Life and death are predestined. At least for now, I admit defeat." Chapter 1297. The long night was coming to an end. The sky gradually brightened. In the early morning, there was a layer of white mist in Tiannan. The white mist enveloped the headquarters of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, blurring everything. The lights were still on in Li Huaqing's temporary residence. The president, who had been busy all night, sat on the sofa, dipped his fingers in the tea, and gently rubbed his eyebrows. The projection of the god of war had disappeared. Obviously, as the first generation of the god of war in Zhongzhou State, he seemed to have nothing to do with Zhongzhou State now. He refused Li Huaqing's invitation to the Hidden Dragon Sea and wanted to revisit the old place. He wanted to go to the place where he had been, take a look, and see his son. Li Huaqing rubbed his forehead, and his face gradually became solemn in silence. On this night, his brain was unprecedentedly active, but also unprecedentedly tired. The information brought by the god of war impacted countless deep-rooted beliefs in his mind. Every time his thoughts turned, he seemed to make a decision, but all the decisions were forcibly suppressed by him. He heard a story that he had never imagined before. But he believed this story. Yes, he believed everything War God said, and he believed in the identity of War God. Perhaps he had countless reasons to doubt the authenticity of this story, but those reasons kept appearing, and finally Li Huaqing chose to believe it. Real environment, real imprint. Li Huaqing suddenly frowned. War God revealed a lot of information to him. But a considerable part of this information, at least in a short time, it didn't matter whether he believed it or not. But one thing was very clear. The sword light he saw in Li Guangtu's mind was real. Li Dongqing really existed in another time and space. That was Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai's son. Sword god Li Dongqing and War God's son was also here at present. According to War God's news, War God's son would undoubtedly become Li Tianlan's opponent at this stage. At present, Li Huaqing didn't know who the son of War God was, but he knew what he was about to get. War God brought his son a gift that could open up the situation. That was a sword energy that belonged to Li Dongqing in his heyday, and part of his state of mind. Sword God, Heavenly Son, that supreme realm, that supreme person he. What could a sword energy do? The fact was obvious. At least in Zhongzhou State, there was a ready-made example. The reason why Wang Xingxiao could rank second on the divine list was that he had Wang Tianzong's sword energy on him. Therefore, strictly speaking, the first place on the divine list was Li Tianlan, and the second place was neither Wang Xingxiao nor Wang Tianzong, but Wang Tianzong's sword qi. The sword qi ranked second on the divine list. Li Huaqing thought silently and frowned. The direction of his spiritual domain was relatively moderate, taking into account Li Guangtu's explosive power and Qin Weibai's strange concealment. Therefore, in terms of hypnosis ability, he was not as good as Qin Weibai. In terms of martial arts strength, he was not as good as Li Guangtu. However, his path took into account all the characteristics of these two people. Therefore, Li Huaqing's real strength was enough to sweep away most people on the divine list. Naturally, his vision was not bad. When he was in Mormons, although Wang Tianzong had broken through to that realm, he was far from his heyday and had not reached the peak of that realm. But even so, his sword energy could still take Wang Xingxiao to the second place on the divine list. Li Huaqing was not sure how terrifying Li Dongqing would be in his heyday, but he was undoubtedly stronger than Wang Tianzong. This could also be confirmed, because he saw the sword light in the depths of Li Guangtu's memory. The half-North Sea. The first move of East Emperor. Not to mention whether that was Li Dongqing's heyday, at least the sword that Li Huaqing saw, or these two swords, each sword was no less than the eternal sword above Mormons, which meant that each sword could hurt Wang Tianzong at that time. Wang Tianzong's sword energy could make Wang Xingxiao what he was today. So what would happen if Li Dongqing's sword energy fell into the hands of the god of war's son? The reason why Wang Xingxiao could be where he was today was firstly because of Wang Tianzong, and secondly because their sword energy came from the same source. Li Dongqing's sword energy and the son of war should not have such a phenomenon. But Li Dongqing was obviously stronger than Wang Tianzong. In this way, it was hard to say how much movement his sword energy could make. But at the very least, it meant that another superior who could surpass the peak of the invincible realm was about to enter the secular world. Surpass the peak of the invincible realm, in terms of combat effectiveness, Li Tianlan, Li Guangtu, Wang Xingxiao, Jiang Shangyu, and Lin Fengting were all in this realm. Compared with Li Tianlan, there was another person, who was stronger and who was weaker. The father paid the son's debts. He recalled the word that the god of war had said, and his expression was a little strange. Li Tianlan was about to face the god of war's son. But in fact, he had to face the sword energy that belonged to his own son. He had to admit that the god of war's realm played with such an incredible thing. I'm committing a sin. Li Huaqing took a deep breath and sighed softly. He felt that he was also committing a sin. It was not easy for him to find a good whetstone for Li Tianlan. The luxurious trio of Li Guangtu, Jiang Shangyu, and Gu Xingyun, and now there was another son of war. The Wang family of Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace were obviously not on good terms. If he was not careful, the situation that Li Tianlan would face would be even more severe. He was really a little worried that his new student would not be able to bear it. The sound of footsteps rang out. Ma Si, who had gone out to prepare breakfast, hurried into the door. Li Huaqing, who had been hungry all night, subconsciously glanced at Ma Si's hands. Ma Si's hands were empty. There was no breakfast. Li Huaqing looked at him with a questioning look in his eyes. President. Ma Si took a deep breath. I didn't get to the canteen. Something happened on the way. I think it's necessary to report to you first. Go ahead. Li Huaqing picked up a tissue and wiped the traces of tea on his forehead. Li Guangtu is now at the gate of the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Ma Si's eyes flashed with the light of thinking. 10 minutes ago, he summoned all the core members of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and said that he would hold a temporary meeting. Isn't it a little early? Li Huaqing said subconsciously, even if there is a meeting, it has to wait until they have moved to Yuzhou. They don't intend to go to Yuzhou. No, it should be said that Li Guangtu doesn't intend to let these people go to Yuzhou. What do you mean? Ma Si narrowed his eyes. I heard from Li Ming that Li Guangtu intends to give up his identity in the Li family and give everything of the Li family to Li Tianlan unconditionally. Ma Si's tone was a little difficult. This was definitely a piece of news that would explode the whole dark world. As soon as he heard the news, he had already begun to think about a series of chain reactions that this news would cause. Li Huaqing fell silent. He sat on the sofa and was silent for a long time. Then he slowly got up and said, "Come with me to have a look." Chapter 1298. The relocation work of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, which had been busy all day, completely stopped in the morning. Many people were informed at breakfast time. Li Guangtu was standing in front of the gate of the Purgatory of Heaven capital at this time, planning to get together with everyone. When receiving the news in different corners of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, different people were silent for a while at the same time. Then they put down what they were doing and began to gather in front of the gate. Li Guangtu and Dawn stood quietly in front of the gate of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. He seemed to be a little tired, so he slowly sat on the ground, smoked, and waited for everyone to arrive. The crowd in front of the gate was getting bigger and bigger, from dozens to hundreds of people. More and more people stood together, but the atmosphere was getting quieter and quieter. Li Guangtu silently looked at the crowd in front of him. The crowd was also quietly watching him. Time passed little by little. Dawn, who had been standing next to Li Guangtu, straightened his body, and a sword energy spread out with him as the center. It kept flying in the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and swept across the whole headquarters. Dawn suddenly fell silent. He stood there stiffly and remained silent for a full 5 minutes. Li Guangtu lowered his head and looked at his watch. His eyes intentionally or unintentionally looked at all the roads that could lead to the gate, with a faint expectation that was hard to be found in the depths of his eyes. Dawn turned slightly and looked at Li Guangtu. The corner of his mouth moved with difficulty, and he said in a hoarse voice, "Brother, everyone is here." Li Guangtu's sitting body shook slightly. He slowly turned his head and looked at the crowd standing in front of the gate, his face pale. For more than 20 years. No, even for a much, much longer time, he knew what he had paid for it. He practiced martial arts desperately, wanted to bear the glory of the Li family, carefully calculated Beihai, intended to rob the power of the Southeast Group, overturn the world, and maneuvered. In East Island, he endured and accumulated strength, secretly made arrangements, suppressed all the hatred at the bottom of his heart, and carefully swallowed his anger. The purgatory of heaven capital entered the secular world in East Island, couldn't wait to expand, and made countless plans behind the scenes. There were too many things. For so many years, he had always thought that he was the most worthy person to be the patriarch of the Li family. He really didn't care about the so-called hardships and difficulties. He was willing and even enjoyed the feeling of carrying everything on his back and carrying the Li family forward. This was his greatest motivation. He was afraid that he was useless, afraid that he would not achieve anything, afraid that he would disappoint his old brothers who had always been by his side. He felt that he still had time. If he was lucky, he might even have the potential to take another step forward. He wanted to build an absolutely powerful Li family, annex the Wang family of Beihai, compete with Zhongzhou state, and dominate the dark world. For this goal, he didn't care if it took 10 years, 20 years, or even a lifetime. He hoped that when he was so old that he could no longer lift his sword, he would be able to see his dynasty. He wanted to see his old brothers who had followed him without any regrets. They could still stand by his side, pat him on the shoulder, and tell him that he had done well all these years. But now, everything he had been looking forward to for so many years seemed to have been shattered along with the stubbornness in his heart, becoming illusory. Dawn said everyone was present. However, there were no more than 300 people standing in front of him. Under normal circumstances, there were at least 800 people who were qualified to stand here and appear here. At his invitation, less than half of the people came to the gate of the purgatory of heaven capital this morning. Where did the rest of the people go? In fact, the answer was self-evident. Some people left, some people stayed, and some people said goodbye to him. But more people, as soon as he came back, began to pack up, quietly left the purgatory of heaven capital, and set foot on the road to Emperor Dong's palace. Part of the reason why these people left was because of Li Honghe's unfulfilled wish, part of the reason was because of Li Tianlan's promise to the Li family's future, and part of the reason was that the purgatory of heaven capital was about to carry out in-depth cooperation with Kunlun City. This was even the biggest reason. The real people of the Li family couldn't accept the ending of turning enemies into friends with Kunlun City, and they couldn't accept the reality that they had to target another part of the Li family's power after shaking hands with Kunlun City. So they didn't even need Li Guangtu's explanation. They didn't even bother to say a word to him. He cooperated with Gu Xingyun to besiege Li Tianlan, to be captured by Li Tianlan, and to return to the purgatory of heaven capital. After confirming that he was safe, as the sword energy that Li Tianlan used to block the headquarters of the purgatory of heaven capital dissipated, they left without hesitation. All those who left, and even those who hadn't left, after all, they were still disappointed with him. Li Guangtu stood up. His throat moved, and a mouthful of blood suddenly spurted out of his mouth. Dawn supported him with a lot of strength. There was a moment of commotion in the crowd in front of him, and then it quieted down again. The silence was a little stiff. Li Guangtu waved his hand, let go of Dawn, and stood in front of the crowd. He stretched out his palm and patted the shoulder of a person in front of him. Li Si. His voice was low and hoarse. Li Si stood quietly and let Li Guangtu's palm fall on him. Li Guangtu laughed. He walked over in the front row of the crowd, and his palm fell on another person's shoulder. Li Qi. Wang Yu. Lin Tao. Li Hong. He was there. He walked slowly in the crowd, past the first row, went to the second row, and then the third row. In the crowd of hundreds of people, Li Guangtu, who was weak, kept looking for familiar figures. This was his memory of being in the Li family. He wasn't even familiar with many of them, but he could always call out everyone's name. Li Guangtu's smile became extremely obvious. Li family. Li family. Li family. Li family. He patted on the shoulder of every member of the Li family and kept muttering to himself. In the fourth row. In the fifth row. Li Guangtu walked over one by one, muttering the two words, Li family, as if he had lost his soul in a trance. His eyes were completely focused, but his walking figure became slower and slower. In the sixth row. The neat and tidy figures appeared in front of Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu's mouth moved, but he did not speak. In his sight was a row of elites of the purgatory of heaven capital. The elites of the purgatory of heaven capital. The veterans of the Li family that he was familiar with and trusted most were all gone in this row. He stood there in a daze. After a long time, he laughed at himself and whispered, "It turns out that this is how it feels to be abandoned by most people." "But I'm not angry at all," he muttered to himself and returned to the front of the crowd. Looking at the square formation in front of him, he did not speak for a long time. All veterans of the Li family, take a step forward. After a long time, Li Kuangtu said softly. The crowd was silent for a while. Then, everyone who had been patted on the shoulder by Li Kuangtu took a step forward. "Sorry." Li Kuangtu smiled. In front of these people, he bowed deeply and deeply. "I can't go on with you anymore." In the hundreds of years of history of the Li family, there are not many deserters. I guess from today on, I will become the most famous one in the history of the Li family. From today on, all the veterans of the Li family have nothing to do with the purgatory of heaven capital. I officially quit the Li family. Before I quit, I recognize Li Tianlan as the patriarch. I am no longer qualified to lead the Li family. From now on, you are free to come and go. You can go to Emperor Dong's palace to report or live the life you want. From now on, there is only one Li family in the dark world. The Purgatory of Heaven capital is now renamed the Purgatory Army and has nothing to do with the Li family. Li Kuangtu straightened up, looked at the veterans of the Li family in front of him, and bowed again. I'm sorry. I should continue to write later. There is one more chapter. I should be able to read it in the morning. Chapter 1299. When Li Huaqing took Ma Si to the gate of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, Li Kuangtu was lying on the grass in front of the gate, facing the morning sun, quietly looking at the statue standing at the gate. It was a huge sword burning in the fire. It was a statue and also the badge of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The sword light of the Li family would perish, but one day it would rise from the ashes. This was the belief that Li Kuangtu had adhered to for many years. Today, he personally handed over his Li family to others, to the enemy that he would target at all costs. His Li family had been reborn. But Li Kuangtu was lying on the grass as if he was dead. Li Huaqing slowed down and came to Li Kuangtu's side, looking down at him. Li Kuangtu's eyes were empty and silent, not reflecting anything. "What are you thinking about?" Li Huaqing asked. Think about the future. Li Kuangtu said and suddenly laughed at himself. "I'm already in my 50s. Isn't it a bit pretentious to think about these things? Planning your life has nothing to do with age." Li Huaqing shook his head. "Right?" Li Kuangtu responded casually and said casually, "What are you thinking about?" "I was thinking about your impromptu meeting." Li Huaqing turned around and looked at the crowd that was still standing. The crowd was small. To be exact, they could only find these people in the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, which seemed a bit pitiful. The square formation formed by the crowd was also not neat. Gaps could be seen everywhere. The gaps weren't large, but there were a lot of them. It was as if there had been a lot of people standing there, but they had all left the square formation. "There are a lot fewer people," Li Huaqing said. "Yes. More than half of the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital have left overnight. The last dozens of people also left just now." Li Kuangtu's tone was calm. Just like the last group of people from the Li family walked out of the square formation, silently walked out of the gate, and officially left the Purgatory of Heaven capital. From start to finish, he was calm and emotionless. Many years ago, he established the Purgatory of Heaven capital in East Island. The veterans of the Li family joined the Purgatory of Heaven capital from the border. Many years later, they left the Purgatory of Heaven capital. In the long time, from the beginning to the end, they did not have a good reunion, nor did they have a good separation. Everyone who left was very calm. There was no reluctance, no entanglement, no struggle. They quietly turned around and walked out of the gate of the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. From beginning to end, no one looked back. Therefore, Li Kuangtu completely understood their attitude, and also understood the attitude of those who left without saying goodbye. She left the purgatory of heaven capital, but did not say goodbye to him. It wasn't that they didn't dare to, but those people were completely disappointed in him and chose to leave in silence. Do you regret it? Li Huaqing handed Li Guangtu a cigarette. Li Guangtu took it, lit it, took a puff, and asked, "What do you mean?" "Probably both." Li Huaqing's voice was somewhat muffled. "Not really." Li Guangtu looked at the empty seats in the square formation and seemed to feel a little dazzling. He turned his head and said blandly, "I probably know the reason why they didn't leave before I spoke. I'm not afraid of being laughed at, but those who left last night were either people promoted by the old man or people who had been at the border for a long time and were very familiar with Li Tianlan. As for those who just walked out of this crowd, I'm familiar with some of them, and some of them I'm not familiar with. But if you really divide the Li family into two, these people are the people I promoted and can be regarded as my team. I can be sure that if I didn't cooperate with Gu Xingyun, these people would follow me. Even if they were enemies with Li Tianlan, they would stand by my side. But how can there be so many ifs? The cooperation between the Purgatory Legion and the Kunlun Legion is a foregone conclusion. These people didn't leave before, probably because they wanted to send me off? When the Purgatory Legion confirms the station and I get a firm foothold, these people will probably leave. They may go to Emperor Dong's palace or leave the Li family. It's not that they can't accept me, but they can't accept my cooperation with Gu Xingyun. From this point of view, they should be disappointed in me and indifferent to me, because they didn't betray me. Cooperating with Gu Xingyun is tantamount to me betraying the Li family. No matter what everyone in the Li family thought of Li Tianlan, at least, no one could accept Gu Xingyun as their partner. The hatred that had been buried for many years had long been deep-rooted, and Li Guangtu was not qualified to resolve it. So after this morning, there were only 3 people who could really be regarded as members of the Li family left with him: Dawn, Daybreak, and Phoenix. There were only 3. Now standing in the square formation in front of him, they were not from the Li family, but from the Purgatory of Heaven capital. No regrets? Li Huaqing asked. If it's about this matter, there's nothing to regret. A mistake is a mistake. Li Guangtu shook his head. From the moment I decided to cooperate with Gu Xingyun, I knew it would be like this. Li Huaqing raised his eyebrows slightly. Before he spoke, Li Guangtu had already waved his hand. I know what you want to say. I, Gu Xingyun, and Jiang Shangyu, when the 3 of us join forces, there's no need to say more about our strength. I don't know what the 2 of them think about besieging Li Tianlan, but I think the chance of success is very high, enough for me to take a gamble. If Li Tianlan died in that siege, the Li family would also be dissatisfied with me, and even some people would choose to leave. But at that time, the Li family would only have one choice left. They would leave, but more people would stay, and I would completely control the Li family. But Li Tianlan survived. He also captured me, and at the same time announced the next heir of the Li family. At this point, there's no way to save it. Li Tianlan invited me to be the first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, but I didn't agree. I guess many people have already known about this matter. With this matter, they have no reason to stay. To be honest, I refused Li Tianlan because I didn't know what was good for me. After all, the group of 3 you expected can't be led by me. In their eyes, a person who refused the first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace and still went to cooperate with the enemy is really despicable. He doesn't deserve their support. You can explain to them why you refused Li Tianlan. Li Huaqing took a deep drag on his cigarette. It doesn't make sense. Li Guangtu shook his head expressionlessly. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes. In the smoke, he suddenly said, "What about this matter? Do you regret refusing Li Tianlan?" "I regret it." Li Guangtu smiled. "But it also doesn't make sense. If I have to do it again, I will still refuse. I can give you another chance." Li Huaqing said lightly, "If you regret, you can go to Emperor Dong's palace now. As long as you can pass Boss Qin, Tianlan will definitely not embarrass you. At that time, you will be the first deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, and the Purgatory Legion will completely belong to Emperor Dong's palace. If you do this, you will not give up much, just some dignity and face." But as long as Emperor Dong's palace accepts you, you will probably have a good end in the future. Do you want to think about it? Li Guangtu frowned and looked at Li Huaqing, a little stunned. He slowly sat up from the grass, looked at Li Huaqing and said attentively, "What happened?" Under normal circumstances, Li Huaqing would not make this decision. Li Guangtu admitted that he was no match for Li Tianlan, but he would not belittle himself. He knew his weight. At least for now, he was an indispensable chess piece to check and balance Li Tianlan. A super superior who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. It meant too many things. But Li Huaqing would give up such a bargaining chip? This also meant that among the things that Li Huaqing could get in touch with, there were already people or other forces who could replace Li Guangtu and even better check and balance Li Tianlan. But such a person, Li Guangtu knew nothing about it. "It doesn't matter," Li Huaqing said calmly. "The important thing is that you now have a chance to choose again. You can join Emperor Dong's palace." Li Guangtu looked at Li Huaqing silently. After a while, he suddenly laughed. A little light began to flicker in his pupils, and he seemed to recover a little spirit. "I refuse." He repeated his answer and said slowly, "I misunderstood." "What do you mean?" Li Huaqing frowned. "You are willing to let me join the Li family, which means that in your heart, there is already someone who can replace me and put more pressure on Li Tianlan. But I overestimated myself. The person in your heart should be more than just replacing me, right? If I leave and join Emperor Dong's palace, it is equivalent to the power of two of me. That is to say, in your heart, the new person who can replace me is equivalent to the pressure caused by two of me to Li Tianlan? I don't know who such a person is. But it is impossible for Wang Tianzong to suddenly recover. In this case, why should I be the deputy palace master? What I want is the Li family. What I want is Li Tianlan's death. You have such a candidate, plus me, is the chance of Li Tianlan's death greater?" Li Huaqing's eyes flickered, and he did not speak. Li Guangtu stretched lazily. He said lightly, "I will hand over all the properties, wealth, and secrets of the purgatory of heaven capital to Emperor Dong's palace. I can give Li Tianlan the Li family he wants. But whether or not he could defend it would depend on his own abilities. I have quit the Li family. Even if you give me 10,000 chances to choose, I will still refuse Li Tianlan's request. You think I can get past Qin Weibai as long as I give up some dignity and face when I go back to Emperor Dong's palace? You're wrong. In this world, that siren is probably the one who wants me dead the most. Go back to Emperor Dong's palace? Not to mention dignity and face, even if I gave up everything, I still wouldn't be able to get past her. From the moment I came out of Emperor Dong's palace, I've already regarded myself as a chess piece in your hand. Me, Daybreak, Dawn, and the elites in front of us, you can use me at will. We are currently penniless. Zhongzhou State can provide whatever the Purgatory Legion needs. Now, I am not Li Guangtu of the Li family. You are a pawn in your hand, a dog of the Senate." Hee ha ha. Li Guangtu suddenly laughed. He looked at Li Huaqing's calm face and suddenly opened his mouth. "Woof, woof, woof, woof. Ha ha, look at me, woof, woof. Do I look like a qualified dog?" Chapter 1300. He was a breeze in the world, a ghost between heaven and earth. He came with the wind and left with the wind silently. In the morning, the god of war had traveled through more than 9 million square kilometers of mountains and rivers in Zhongzhou State. Revisiting the old places was the most interesting and the most boring. The key between these two meanings was time. Time was meaningless. Time passed quickly in the starry sky. Billions of years had passed. Even in real time, it had been more than 400 years since he left Miracle City. The long span of time had made everything familiar in his memory strange. It was not like the old place, but a new place. The figure of the god of war appeared in Yuzhou. The once familiar division of areas had changed beyond recognition. Even with memory, he could not find the place where his adoptive parents took him in when he was a child. The atmosphere in the hidden Dragon Sea was quiet. The hidden sea and the Dragon Sea were calm. The statue of the god of war that once stood here had disappeared, and there was no trace of his wedding here. The figure of the god of war swept across Yuzhou and appeared in Kunlun Mountain. There was no dragon vein on Kunlun Mountain, and the traces of his life here hundreds of years ago had completely disappeared. The pavilions, terraces, and vast palaces at the beginning of Zhuanyuantai had become the scenery in his memory. His figure dissipated in the wind and snow, and the next second he had appeared in a foreign country. It was night time in the capital of Star State, and the lights were shining and magnificent. In the sight of the god of war was the fountain and garden in front of the white court of Star State. The water column and the night light intertwined, and the colors were gorgeous. The expression of the god of war was calm and subtle. Star State. Hundreds of years ago, it was the most powerful overlord country in the world. It could not be regarded as the lifelong enemy of the god of war, but a considerable part of the achievements and legends of the god of war were cast by Star State. He pushed Star State down from the throne. In decades, he lifted Zhongzhou State up and completely established Zhongzhou State's position. Today, in the south of Star State, the kingdom of Disak that he and the Wang family of Beihai supported was still the firmest ally of Zhongzhou State. At the same time, it was also the most powerful pawn of Zhongzhou State to check and balance Star State. The god of war smiled silently. His feelings for the Star State were rather special. His contributions to Zhongzhou State would settle down and be recorded in books as legends, but after all, they would not be mentioned all the time. However, the harm he did to Star State was unforgettable to the people of Star State. Back then, he was the god of war in the eyes of the people of Zhongzhou State. Today, he was still the devil in the eyes of the people of Star State. His name was still something that the people of Star State would gnash their teeth in anger whenever he mentioned it. Without the strong hatred of Star State, he might have been completely lost or even fallen when he set foot on the peak. The god of war entered the White Court and walked around it silently. This was the center of power in Star Nation, but he was not interested in the large number of confidential documents inside the White Court. He decided to use this time to study the history of Star Nation over the past few hundred years and calculate what had happened in Star Nation when he had reached the peak of the starry sky. During that critical period, if it were not for the curses and hatred the people of Star Nation had for him made him completely recognize his identity, the consequences would have been unimaginable. The god of war stood in the White Court's presidential office in a daze. By the time he came to his senses, there was already a deafening sound around him. The slightly salty wind blew from afar. It was cold all around. The violent airflow reverberated between heaven and earth, bringing a shrill echo. Mount Dibing, stage of formidable person. Wang Xianxia, who was meditating, immediately stood up straight. His pupils contracted to the extreme. He stared at the god of war who suddenly appeared beside him and asked, "Who are you?" It did not matter who he was. The important thing was that Wang Xianxia did not know that there was such an expert in the dark world at this time. The other party's appearance was completely silent. His perception did not give him any warning. He opened his eyes unconsciously and saw a figure standing beside him. What did it mean? It meant that if the other party wanted to kill him, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai would have died at that moment. The god of war turned his head and glanced at Wang Xianxia. The extremely strong sword energy began to condense behind his vigilance and fear, as if it would break out at any time. The god of war ignored him. He just quietly looked up at the stone of formidable person in front of him. At the top of the stone of formidable person, his name was still clear. The sky of Beihai was gloomy. His name was juxtaposed with the name of the ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai, looking extremely profound. If he did not count the Lin clan, which he was already somewhat unfamiliar with. This was the deepest trace he left in the City of Miracles. It was also the trace he was most familiar with. The god of war was lost in thought. The sword energy lingering around him spread unconsciously. The wind and clouds above Mount Dibing suddenly changed. Wang Xianxia, who was about to make a move, changed his expression and suppressed the sword energy that was about to break out. At this moment, the strange figure in his sight clearly did nothing, but a stream of sword energy, which seemed real and illusory, directly filled every corner of Mount Dibing. he stood motionless, as if he only needed to flick his finger, the whole Mount Dibing, the whole Shenzhou city, and even the whole world would be torn apart in an instant. That was an inconceivably powerful sharpness that even exceeded his understanding. Senior, Wang Xiangxiao's scalp went numb. After getting his father's sword energy, he thought that there was nothing in the dark world that he should be afraid of. But at this moment, under the sword energy that was almost impossible to grasp but real, he suddenly felt extremely small. The god of war turned his head and glanced at him again. In silence, his figure slowly dissipated, as if he had never been there. Wang Xiangxiao was in a trance for a moment and frowned. He suddenly didn't know why he woke up from a deep meditation. He just felt inexplicable. The god of war was a memory. When this memory spread, he also took away Wang Xiangxiao's memory about him. The sword energy that covered the world became completely illusory. It began to spread to the whole Mount Dibing with the stage of formidable person as the center. High in the sky, the god of war stood quietly. He felt his sword energy spread out bit by bit and frowned slightly. He was looking for Worryless, who was said to have been contaminated. But he found nothing. After all, it was not his real body. He was just a memory. Strictly speaking, under the suppression of the real environment, he only had the momentum of the heavenly sun, but he didn't have any strength. The only convenience was that he was just a memory. Because it had nothing to do with the real space, he could travel in the real environment at will. But it was difficult to affect reality, and it was impossible to find Worryless, who was hiding on Mount Dibing. Memory was illusory after all. Illusory. The god of war suddenly froze. His eyes suddenly flashed with an incomparably sharp light. At this moment he seemed to have grasped some inspiration. But the inspiration disappeared completely in the next second. The god of war frowned and looked down at the stage of formidable person. On the stage of formidable person, Wang Xiangxiao, who had forgotten the scene just now, sat down again and began to meditate. The sword energy coat formed by Wang Tianzong's sword energy covered his body, rising and falling with his breath. The god of war narrowed his eyes. The sword energy coat was similar to Worryless' existence to a certain extent. Even at the very beginning, Wang Xiangxiao and Wang Tianzong's sword energy was merged with Worryless. But now, this coat had little to do with Worryless. The god of war maintained his sword energy and continued to spread around Mount Dibing. In the blink of an eye, the illusory sword energy had covered half of Shenzhou city. The god of war, who was still searching carefully, suddenly frowned. His sword energy, which was spreading quickly, suddenly stopped completely and uncontrollably. The next second, the real but illusory sword energy suddenly began to shrink. The god of war lost control of the sword energy. His sword energy began to condense toward Mount Dibing and concentrated on the stage of formidable person. In the distant North Sea, there was a sudden surge. Huge waves rose to the sky. The sea seemed to be boiling in an instant. In the distant North Sea, a huge whirlpool with a diameter of nearly 10,000 meters suddenly appeared. The whirlpool stirred the sea and rotated crazily. There was a loud roar between heaven and earth. The god of war seemed to be surprised and raised his eyebrows. He laughed. In his perception, an ocean-like sword chi rushed out from the center of the vortex in a grandiose manner. Wang Xiangxiao, who was awakened again, slowly stood up. High in the sky, the pupils of the god of war contracted for a moment. In the depths of North Sea, a vast sword energy occupied the sky and rushed to the stage of formidable person with a tsunami-like wave at a very fast speed. The 100-meter-high wave was like a giant palm between the sky and the sea, slapping on the cliff of the stage of formidable person. The water splashed. The endless sword energy had been condensed to the extreme. A figure slowly took shape in front of Wang Xiangxiao. The god of war's eyes lit up. Worryless. Or Wang Tianzong. The figure in front of Wang Xiangxiao kept outlining, becoming clearer, and finally became Wang Tianzong's appearance. The corner of Wang Xiangxiao's mouth moved, but he didn't speak. He didn't know what to say. The figure in front of him was his father. But in fact, this figure was composed of Wang Tianzong's sword energy and a bit of consciousness. It was led by Worryless' will, just like the figure that appeared at the end of the final battle in North Sea. But the Wang Tianzong, in front of him, was more agile than that day. The god of war's eyes sparkled as he carefully observed Worryless's current state. In front of Wang Xianxia, Worryless's body moved a little stiffly. The fierce and world-shaking sword qi kept circling around him. It was the most powerful sword energy in the entire dark world now. He didn't notice the god of war high in the sky. He just looked ahead calmly. There was nothing in front of him. But the god of war knew very well that his incomparably illusory sword energy had completely condensed into a point of nothingness under the pressure of Wang Tianzong's sword energy. The level of his sword energy was much higher than Wang Tianzong's. But now the god of war was illusory, so his sword energy was naturally illusory and had no lethality at all. On the stage of Formidable Person, Worryless raised his arm. The endless sword energy kept surging with him as the center. The extremely powerful sword energy completely wrapped the illusory sword energy of the god of war. Wang Xianxia frowned. Before he could speak, the sword energy on Worryless's body suddenly exploded. The sword light on the stage of Formidable Person radiated everywhere and returned to Beihai in a mighty manner. The sword energy coat appeared on Wang Xianxiao's body again. Wang Tianzong's figure disappeared. Worryless returned to the invisible state of concealment. Only the billowing sword light streaked across the sky and the sea in front of the stage of Formidable Person like a torrent and finally returned to silence. The huge whirlpool on Beihai slowly disappeared. Everything was calm and peaceful. At the same time, under the sea, at the core of the Beihai prison, in the hibernation chamber surrounded by countless medical instruments, Wang Tianzong, who was sleeping, frowned tightly. All kinds of instruments issued alarms one after another. In the modified temporary laboratory, a group of elites from the Beihai Biological Laboratory in white coats were discussing Wang Tianzong's situation. When the alarm sounded, they were stunned for a moment. Then, everyone's expression changed dramatically. They rushed to the hibernation chamber with ecstasy and almost madness. On the huge screen in front of the hibernation chamber, the data representing Wang Tianzong's various physical indicators flashed wildly on the screen. Rising. Rising. It continued to rise. How is it possible? Why is it like this? Good. Ah, good. This is a miracle. A miracle has happened. A miracle has happened. A little higher, a little higher. Hurry up. Inform Mr. Saint and the Patriarch. Saint didn't need to be informed. When the laboratory alarm sounded, she had already walked into the laboratory unhurriedly. Looking at the rolling complex data on the huge screen above the hibernation chamber, she raised her eyebrows slightly. Mr. Saint, this? Did you do this? It must be. Only you have this kind of means, Mr. Saint. Thank you, thank you. Saint stared at the data on the screen and remained silent. The complicated data kept refreshing, and gradually, many symbols that represented the various indicators of the body began to repeat. What repeated were symbols. The numbers behind the symbols were still rising. In just a few minutes, the rows of numbers had approached the level of a normal person. Several doctors from the Beihai Biological Laboratory watched this scene with excitement and tears streaming down their cheeks. Finally, the constantly rolling data rushed over the line they expected. The alarm in the laboratory suddenly quieted down. In the hibernation chamber, Wang Tianzong, whose body was wrapped in countless bubbles, slowly relaxed his frown. Very obviously, he made a gesture of taking a deep breath. Outside the hibernation chamber, under everyone's extremely nervous gaze, Wang Tianzong's eyes slowly opened. In the suffocating silence, Wang Tianzong lay quietly and looked at the light of the hibernation chamber above his head. He blinked. Chapter 1301. In the laboratory in the center of Beihai Prison, almost everyone went completely crazy. Almost fanatical emotions permeated from everyone's eyes. Everyone could feel the surprise and excitement in each other. From the chaos in Snow Country to the present. Since Wang Tianzong became the Patriarch of Beihai, the past 2 years had been the most turbulent period. The suppression of the parliament, the restlessness of the dark world, the strong oppression brought to Beihai by Li Tianlan, Jiang Shangyu, and others, everything, for hundreds of years, this was what Beihai had been bearing, but it was something that few people could feel. Especially during the period of Wang Tianzong. During this period, without the Li family and the constraints and checks and balances around them, the Southeast group was gradually unified. After Wang Tianzong reached the top of the divine list, all the pressure from the outside world seemed to have completely disappeared. He could not be said to be the most outstanding patriarch in the history of the Wang family of Beihai, but he was definitely one of the strongest and most responsible patriarchs. He stood quietly on Mount Dibing and bore all the hostility and pressure from the outside world. Whether it was a bloody storm or a stormy sea in front of him, Beihai behind him was always carefree, a paradise full of dreams and light. Until he fell in snow country under the eternal sword of Mormons. Beihai was turned upside down. There was no dream in the world, and there was no light in the world. The figure that could block all the external pressure disappeared in front of the people of Beihai. Wang Xianxia came out. His shoulders were still very tender, and he had ascended in a hurry. The pressure from the outside world was overwhelming. This was something that Wang Tianzong could easily resist in the past, but when it fell on Wang Xianxia, it was almost unbearable. So on Mount Dibing, the entire Beihai province began to be turbulent. More than 2 years were the time when Wang Xianxia matured quickly. No one would say that the young patriarch of Beihai was bad. Everyone could see that he had done his best. But everyone still hoped that Wang Tianzong could wake up. He was the first supreme chosen one in 100 years. If he could wake up and recover, together with the current Wang Xianxia, the present and future of Beihai would be unimaginably brilliant. So for more than 2 years, the top elites of Beihai's biological laboratory had been working overtime, trying to help their patriarch recover as soon as possible. Their efforts had achieved a certain degree of effect. Wang Tianzong's condition was indeed improving. However, the effect was not great. According to the normal speed, it would take at least 10 years for Wang Tianzong to recover. 10 years, not to mention the parliament of Zhongzhou state, not to mention Wang Xiaoyao and Wang Qinglei, not to mention other hostile forces. What would Emperor Dong's palace look like in 10 years? This was something that made people feel hopeless just thinking about it. Everyone was helpless, but they still gritted their teeth and persevered. No one could have thought that on a normal day, without any warning, Wang Tianzong's physical condition would suddenly and inexplicably usher in an incredible qualitative change. It was like a real miracle. Wang Tianzong blinked. This was the first time in more than 2 years that Wang Tianzong had consciously made a certain action. In the atmosphere that was almost boiling, the elites of the Beihai Biological Laboratory suddenly fell silent. Then, they turned around at the same time and bowed deeply to Saint. They said sincerely and respectfully, "Thank you, sir." Saint was not ostracized by these people when he participated in the project of treating Wang Tianzong. But at first, he was not valued by these people. People just regarded him as a very ordinary colleague. However, in a very short period of time, Saint had proposed several different treatment directions. At the same time, he used a way that they didn't realize before to prepare several kinds of gene potions. After establishing a preliminary balance for Wang Tianzong's body, everyone was convinced. Saint began to lead this group of top elites and took over the big project of treating Wang Tianzong. Saint had already prepared for Wang Tianzong's current condition. A few days ago, Saint said that in the next few days, Wang Tianzong's physical condition was expected to improve greatly. But no one could have imagined that the so-called improvement was so great. What was the concept of going from near death to full awakening? A group of elites looked up at Saint. Under the light, unlike their ecstatic faces, Saint's expression was still calm and indifferent, without any change in his expression. Sir is really a man of God. A group of elites wanted to worship him. Saint glanced at them, took 2 steps forward and said faintly, "Make way." A group of people stepped back and separated. Saint, who was not outstanding in appearance but full of charm, walked to the hibernation chamber. She observed Wang Tianzong through a small window. Wang Tianzong quietly looked at the soft light above the hibernation chamber. He hadn't opened his eyes for a long time. It seemed difficult for him to adapt, so he blinked faster. Then he saw the saint who was watching him through the window. Wang Tianzong frowned slightly, and a clear doubt appeared in his eyes. He regained consciousness. Saint's eyes were clear, and he was completely sure of it. In this situation, Wang Tianzong was completely awake. His consciousness and thinking were no longer muddle-headed, but he was unprecedentedly sober. Saint remained calm and collected. Two rays of light that were hard to detect flashed in her eyes. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she quietly observed Wang Tianzong. Sword Emperor's physical condition completely appeared in her sight. In her sight, Wang Tianzong's injury was still serious, even almost fatal. Saint could even clearly see that the eternal sword energy was still wreaking havoc inside Wang Tianzong's body, trying to decompose every structure of his body. However, Wang Tianzong's sword energy was constantly resisting, and the two barely reached a balance. Saint was not surprised by this result. Every time she observed Wang Tianzong before, she got the same result. But now, she saw very clearly that there was a third kind of power in Wang Tianzong's body. It was a kind of energy that was so subtle that it was almost imperceptible. It was very weak, but it really existed. Saint's pupils shrank suddenly. This was a kind of energy that was hard for her to describe, with unimaginable vitality and unimaginable destructive power. This energy wandered in Wang Tianzong's body, constantly repairing Wang Tianzong's body, and constantly destroying Wang Tianzong's vitality. Saint quietly looked at Wang Tianzong and kept silent for a long time. Behind her, someone was saying thank you to her. The corner of her mouth twitched, and she looked a little embarrassed with her back to everyone. At this moment, it was hard for her to explain anything to those behind her. To be precise, today's accident did wake Wang Tianzong up. But his injury, instead of getting better, it seemed that it was getting worse. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.